Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Protector of the Fairies in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Protector of the Fairies. A Battle of Kings. Regaining his footing, Mistoggan stabbed one of his staves into the ground as the floor they were on started falling. It only lasted for a few moments before it stopped. Things hadn't stopped falling, however. He was forced to jump over a sliding desk as it crashed down behind him, quickly spinning to look for the others. Nozomi had stabbed her weapon into the ground to stay standing, but Ryrika hadn't been as lucky, crashing against the far wall and being trapped behind some desks. She snarled as she tried to force them off her, eventually giving up before taking a pen out of her pocket. "Hey Nozomi, keep him off me." "Roger." Nozomi pulled her weapon back up before she slowly stared, spinning it to the right. Mistoggan brought his own staves up, confused at why she was spinning the weapon right. And then she vanished from his sight. His only warning of an incoming attack was the slight fluctuation in the air behind him, and even that wasn't enough to completely avoid the strike. The blade cut across his back as he leaped forward, rolling as he hit the ground before bringing up one of his staffs to fire a blast of energy at the attacker. No one was there by that point, and he suddenly felt a slash cut across his leg. His eyes just managed to get a glimpse of Nozomi before she spun her weapon right, vanishing. One of his staves came up to his left, a blast of magic erupting from it as Nozomi appeared, her weapon spinning to the left. It hit her before sending her flying backwards, hitting a wall. Mistoggan turned his attention to Ryrika, who was scribbling furiously on the desks, trapping her, adding hearts and drawings of bunnies in an effort to make them look cute. Before he could make a move, however, he was forced to dodge as a blade flashed by his face. He flipped back through the air, blasting out magic from his staves. Nozomi quickly absorbed the energy before sending it straight back, Mistoggan avoiding it with ease. He dodged her strike from behind as she vanished, noting that she spun the weapon right once more as she vanished, but seemed to be swinging it to the left as she appeared. So that was what she was doing. It wasn't anything new, it was simply the same trick as before. Like before, she was simply ripping holes in space, only this time she used it for herself. By entering the portal, she could then quickly reappear wherever she wanted by reversing her weapon's spin. Considering the time difference was so tiny, however, meant that she had to be using something similar to the Danga to pass through. Some kind of dimension where the energy, or her in this case, was stored until a new hole was opened. The thing that bothered him now, however, was how she was able to move so freely after she had taken a direct hit from one of his magic blasts. Without armor she was certainly fast, something needed for her weapon, but the lack of it also meant she was more prone to magical attacks and that they would do more damage. And here she was fighting like it hadn't even hit her. Could she have dodged it or absorbed it? Unlikely. It hit her and she needed to spin her weapon right to absorb attacks. She had appeared at the time, so she had been spinning the blade left and had no time to change it. So she had been hit properly. But how could she fight like this still? He could expect this from someone from Earthland, but they had. You're from Earthland. He saw Nozomi freeze, her hands clenching around her weapon. You are, aren't you? He quickly manipulated some of the energy in his staves to allow him to sense out towards her, feeling the large amount of magic present inside her. You have an internal source of magic. You have to be. I am, muttered Nozomi, and I am not. You can't be both. You'd be surprised. Nozomi looked at her weapon in what looked to be fondness and sadness. I am both Nozomi of Edelas and Kajarauza from Earthland. The rips between our worlds aren't one way, remember. He came through by chance and never managed to get back. He was that world's version of me, and I don't even know how we came across one another. But how can you be both? Nozomi's hand dropped to her chest, wrapping around her body. We fused. We both were technically the same person in the eyes of magic, and it was what allowed the procedure to work. I became the physical form and identity, and Kajarauza became the source of our shared powers. And because he was from Earthland, he would have an internal source of magic, muttered Mistoggan. And now you do too because of that. Yes. Nozomi glanced at her weapon. We both had our own weapons. His was called Raikya while mine was called Urazome Shiger. A long one, I know. But together, our powers work as one. Nozomi raised her weapon upwards. This is our will. Sumitsuki Gaza. It's a nice weapon, called Ririka suddenly. I helped finish it after all. Miss Doggin turned to see the desk trapping Ririka vanishing in pink light, the girl stretching slightly as she joined Nozomi. Ah, it's good to be out of that mess. It was far too tight for my liking. You could have gotten out much earlier if you weren't so obsessed with cuteness. I think it would have been much faster if you had agreed to my demands about the lab. No. If you had your way we'd be working on top of stuffed animals. How dare you? It'd still be desks. Just cuter ones. Can we have this conversation later? Fine. Ririka eyed Miss Doggin warily. You're a tough one. Despite not being like us, you still have the power to stand against us. I'm an S-class mage back in Fairy Tale. And I did that through a lot of practice with magic tools. Oh. I bet you would been classified as a prodigy here then. Ririka aimed a gauntlet at him. Too bad you won't win. Oh really? Miss Doggin threw a staff at them, the girls ignoring it as it sailed past their heads. What was that? That throw was pathetic. Miss Doggin smirked behind his mask. Oh yeah. His other staves flew out from him and landed in the areas around the girls, forming a pentagon shape. Ririka frowned as she tried to activate her powers, finding them to be failing her. Your powers are all related on a similar principle to the usage of anima. Dimension magic to be precise. And right now you are facing the man who studied anima his entire life. The difference between us is that I didn't bother trying to find out how to further the power that could be gained from it. I devoted my entire being in learning how to stop it. Nozomi tried her own weapon, the blades not cutting a hole into the dimension she could access. Interesting. And of course this energy comes from your staves. We could just destroy them. Miss Doggin clapped his hands together, magic seals appearing above each staff before forming a barrier around the girls. 5-layered magic circle, anima disruption. Nozomi tapped a hand against the barrier before wincing as she drew her hand back. Strong. But it still runs on the energy of the staves. When they run out of magic, we'll be free. That won't happen anytime soon. Oh really? Nozomi raised her weapon up, a blade aimed at the ground. You forgot one important detail. And what is that? That I still have a source of magical power now. So I can use it. The blade stabbed into the ground in a burst of green light shone upwards, blinding Miss Doggin as it took shape. He glanced at it and gulped. That wasn't good. Protector of the fairies. Brother. Nozomi ran up to the orange-haired boy, her brother over his shoulder and supported by another boy, this one with black hair and a large sword attached to his back. She looked at them in fear till she heard the voice of her brother speak. Nozomi. Don't worry. They mean you no harm. She quickly grabbed her brother from them, dragging him away as far as she could as she looked at what was wrong. She couldn't see anything to start with, but closer inspection revealed large burns across his chest under his clothes, and she wasn't blind to not notice the bandages wrapped around his head. What happened? It was the orange-haired boy that answered her. We found him injured. He was in a terrible state, a group of soldiers trying to drag him away. I even heard that someone called Sugar Boy was there. Nozomi's heart clenched. Sugar Boy? Yeah. I'm guessing you know him. Yeah. Same. All I know though is about the weapon he uses. Rosa Espada. The men there were commenting and laughing at the state he was in, saying how your brother was barely able to stand with his brain turning to mush. The boy scowled angrily, his fists clenching. They said his brain was mostly liquid by this point because of that man's weapon. He did what? Nozomi felt something indescribable welling up inside her. Rage. Pure anger and pain. She wanted to crush Sugar Boy. She wanted to kill him and make him pay for all the pain her brother had to be feeling at this moment in time. She wasn't sure what happened to her parents when she was younger. She had been in an orphanage most of her life anyway until Kajiroza had appeared. He had taken her away with him to live, saying those that were the same had to stick together. She wasn't sure yet what he meant by that, but she was sure she would learn soon enough. He always said she would understand it when she got older. She had loved every second of it. The orphanage wasn't exactly kind to her, especially with her habit of causing stuff to vanish. She still didn't know where it went, though her brother seemed to hint that he had an idea whenever it happened. He had never gotten mad at her for it too, saying it made her special. That they both were special. Superior souls, he said they were. Well, his precise words were superior soul, but she normally just assumed he forgot to make it plural when he spoke. He normally did then when talking about them. It was a strange quirk, and it annoyed her sometimes, but she loved her brother anyway. He couldn't die. A hand landed on her shoulder, the orange-haired boy looking at her in concern. I don't know how much we can do for him, but I can at least fulfill the promise he asked me to make. To keep you safe. Can you save him? I don't know. I'm not a miracle maker. I can't fix injuries on this scale. I'm just not good enough. The boy slowly reached out for Kajirouza before the man's hand shot out, gripping his tightly as the man stared at him wildly. Take her. Hurry. Keep her safe. I can take care of myself, lied Nozomi, her brother seeing through Heli with just one exhausted look. I know you can. But just trust me. Go with them. Leave me behind. That isn't part of the deal, said the boy, grabbing the older man as he pulled him back up to his shoulders. Hey Sujiro, give me a hand here. Sujiro obliged, walking over and slinging Kajirouza's other arm over his shoulders. The boy looked at Nozomi before smiling. We said we'd save you, but we never said we'd leave him. Come with us. We'll keep you safe. And, if we're very lucky, you can be with you brother one day. You promise? I promise. Nozomi reluctantly took the boy's hand before he led her away, their pace slow due to Kajirouza's weight. What's your name? My name. The boy smiled. Ichigo. Protector of the fairies. All around Nozomi were waves of magic, transforming in the air as it turned green and began constructing walls around her and Ririka. He saw the surprise on Ririka's face, showing this wasn't anything she had seen before as well. Before long the two girls were inside what looked to be a fortress of energy, a massive green light shooting up from the center of it and turning into a Celtic cross above the fortress. Tendrils burst from the energy making up the walls before latching onto the barrier. At first all seemed fine. And then he saw it. A faint change in the coloring of his barrier as it dimmed a tiny bit. He realized instantly what was going on as he ran through hand signs, applied a secondary barrier into the mix. Fire layered magic circle, Void Zone. The objective of Void Zone was to neutralize a mage's magical power inside it, working on similar principles of the drain spell that some air magic users could use. Since Nozomi now had a source of magical power, this field should now affect her and drain her magic away. And while he knew it was happening to the energy present, the barrier she had made protected her. And he knew what he was doing wasn't enough. He had slowed her progress, but she still had her spell operational, and it was slowly draining the magic in his staves that powered his barrier. If it came down, then he would lose. That barrier was all that was stopping them from using their other abilities, and he wouldn't be able to cast any spells with the staves if the magic was drained from them. He couldn't just remove them, however, as that would be causing the same result. The symbol above the fortress glowed before it blasted a beam of green light down at the barrier, weakening it further. He definitely couldn't take it down now. He'd die otherwise. That beam was no something he wanted to be hit by. Renzenhuja query. I can't do much else than this yet, but it works like a charm. I have all the knowledge for it here in my head. My brother learned it and now it is ours. A nice technique, said Mistogan as he reached into his cloak, but I'm afraid I'm going to have to end this here. He could see the weakness. Nozomi had yet to move her weapon from the ground, and he knew a spell like this had to consume a lot of her power. If he could get to them, then he would win. His hand found what he was looking for before he pulled out a small staff, the weapon extending to a full-length-sized one as it was withdrawn. Bandages were wrapped around it near the top, extending onto the large ring at the top of it. This was the first staff he had ever used, and it would likely end up being the last with what he was about to do. He twirled the staff around him before he slammed it against the ground. And then he vanished before he reappeared right behind Nozomi and Ririka, his staff sparking and burning from whatever he had done. They tried to turn in time, Nozomi even ending the spell as she withdrew her weapon, but it was already too late. A magic seal appeared in front of them all as Mistogen aimed the staff at them. One layered magic circle, spark. The attack hit the girls, each resisting for a moment before the paralysis of the spell kicked in and the two fell to ground. Nozomi lasted longer in her resistance, but the void zone quickly neutralized the magic she had within her, causing her to join Ryrika on the ground as her weapon dropped from her hands. The staff in Mistogen's hands broke apart as the last of the magic in his staves was exhausted, the barriers vanishing. Mistogen smiled as he pulled down part of his mask. He had won. Now he just had to avoid thinking of what he had lost. Protector of the fairies. Where the monster go? I don't know. Search for her. Ryrika hugged her legs, pulling them closer to her in her hiding space. They were still looking for her and she didn't dare make a sound. If she did, they'd kill her. It had all started with that one simple mistake. She loved cute things. Ever since she was young she would collect them, and she had soon realized she was different. Special even. It wasn't just something that her parents said that she believed, she knew it to be a fact. She watched the other kids, she watched her sister too, and none of them could do what she could. If she wanted it, she could take it with just a flick of her finger, storing it away. At first she hadn't known where it all ended up, only that she had it. Once she had learned that she had been able to store things wherever she wanted, whether it was in a simple cute-looking box or whether it was in a locket or even just something boring like a can. All that ever seemed to be required was a certain amount of love for it, though she had tested at times to see if she could take things she didn't love or find cute. It was mostly just an intention to want that let her take it. She had become unstoppable, and no one even knew it was her. Sure, they noticed the stuff was vanishing, but they couldn't work out why. Questions were raised and soldiers would investigate, but they never found anything that could incriminate anyone, much less a little girl. Things had continued like that for years, people just growing used to it and learning to keep their stuff hidden from everyone except their family. At that point she had grown too used to taking whatever she wanted and branched out into burglary. All she ever had to do was break in, send her power flying to whatever she wanted, and then leave. It took just a few seconds if she knew what she wanted normally. And then she had turned 12. She was at school when she saw this boy. He was older than her, almost ready to graduate from what she had heard, and she hadn't been able to help it. She fell in love with him. He was far cuter to her than anything else she had ever seen, and he was always so friendly to everyone, even her. So she had made him hers. Food, toys, she gave him whatever he needed, and at first he seemed to be okay with it. She visited him every day for hours on end, sometimes just talking for that time. But it all went downhill. He realized it wasn't just some elaborate dream. He became desperate to escape. He even tried to attack her as the days grew to weeks. His mood worsened before she finally had enough. She could no longer stand him. That look of fear on his face whenever she came to see him. So she let him go. After never being caught, she never considered what would happen next. He told people, and they had reacted viciously. It wasn't just because she stole from them. It was to do with fear. She knew that plain as day. If she could trap people in boxes with a snap of her fingers, then they were terrified she would do the same to them. They had tried to hurt her, and so she ran and ran and ran. She had been doing so for hours now. Every time she thought she was safe, they would find her. This spot had done her good so far, but they were getting closer and closer with every second. They knew she hadn't escaped the area, their search patrols were too large for her to be able to do that, and it would only be a matter of time unless she got lucky. Maybe they would think this area was clear and move on. Hey! What's wrong with this desk? She clutched her legs tighter. She thought she had moved it back correctly. She had tried to move it as a barricade before but hadn't been able to move it. If her powers would work properly, she'd be able to easily deal with them, but she was too terrified, not able to picture the pursuers correctly to make her power work on them. A creak sounded behind her and her head turned to see a man looking under the bed. Found the brat. She scrambled out the other side, running to the door as the man swore behind her. She was going to make it until another man stepped into the room, seeing her and quickly grabbing her as she tried to escape. She screamed, but no one listened. No one came to help. They dragged her back through the streets towards a larger crowd, the mob cheering in triumphant. She was shoved to the ground harshly before a hand grabbed her by her pigtails and pulled her head up to their level. She cried out in pain, the man in front of her taking pride in it. She recognized him. He was the one she had fallen in love with. No wonder he was happy. He held up a knife to her face and she tried to break free, but his grip was too strong. "Tell me," the man muttered, grabbing her tightly as he pressed the blade up by her eye. "Why did you feel the need to take whatever you want?" He turned to the others in the crowd. "What reason did you have to take from all of us? Were you never satisfied? What gives you, a monster, that right to decide our fates?" The man looked back to her, forcing the knife closer. "Well, survival of the fittest," she replied hesitantly. She certainly had believed that she was allowed to do what she could because she was born with the ability to do so and others weren't. What was wrong with using her ability? The man laughed. "Let me tell you something, girlie. Survival of the fittest is a very misleading set of words. It's the idea that those born different can become the strongest because they are born different, better, superior. But it is a lie. The truth of the matter is that freaks like you won't ever win, not because you're special, but because you are all alone. One-on-one doesn't matter when we are gathered like this. We are the predators here, not some 12-year-old girl." Before he could do anything else, the knife was blasted from his hand, looking to be the work of a blue arrow of what could only be described as pure energy. The man dropped Ryrika to the ground and turned to whoever had fired at him. "Who did that?" A voice sounded behind him. "That would have been me." The man tried to turn but was cut off as sword appeared in the newcomer's hand and stabbed into the man's chest. He fell to the ground, giving Ryrika a good view of her savior. He looked just a bit older than she was with bright orange hair. And he didn't seem intimidated by the crowd as he turned to her. "It is true that what that man said is the reality we have seen in this world, but I disagree on simply obeying it. Why should people like us be feared for what we were gifted? Why should we be hunted or isolated for what we can do?" The boy looked at the restless crowd. "Leave now." "He's just a kid," shouted one person. "Yeah, we can take him easily. Bring him down." The crowd charged and the boy sighed, grabbing Ryrika before they vanished, reappearing behind the crowd. She saw them arrive by 5 others, each looking at the crowd angrily. They all stepped forward and charged as their backs were turned, their respective abilities coming into play. Blanks appeared in the sky, the ground froze, people in the crowd turned on one another, some of them found their weapons ending up vanishing as they stabbed at the group, and some just got hit by small explosive balls of energy. The boy turned to Ryrika again before patting her on the head. "If they were strong enough to kill people like us as a pack, then we simply need to form our own. Do you agree?" Ryrika found herself nodding. "Yes." "Welcome then. I'm Ichigo Kurosake, the man breaking this world's rules. Pleasure to meet you. Protector of the fairies." Ryrika struggled as she forced her head to look up. Nozomi passed out beside her. Mist Ogden heard her struggles before turning from the equipment he was trying to make work. "Stay down. It will make things easier." "How?" she asked faintly. "What was that staff? How did you get to us?" "That staff was my ticket home before it was destroyed." "You are surely familiar with the man who originally created the first anima." Ryrika rolled her eyes, the movement much easier than simply moving her head. "Of course I do. All formulas we use came from his work on some level after all." "I see." Mist Ogden turned properly, crossing his arms. "How did he do it then? What was his magic tool?" "It was..." Ryrika's mouth was left hanging open, shocked speechless. "Yes, I see you noticed. That was his staff, the relic that could open anima with more precision than anything developed beyond this point. It is also the most delicate piece of equipment I ever had. And you jumped straight into a zone that neutralized all anima-related abilities. It stops it from the inside, not outside. I merely slipped through dimensions and forced it open from the other side to get into that little fortress Nozomi had made." Mist Ogden sighed. "Shame I had to, but I had no choice. I ran out of cards to play." Your own spell destroyed the staff once it was used. And that was your only way back to Earthland. Well. There are others but not ones I can afford to get to right now, and there is no guarantee that they are safe places. Miss Doggan smiled sadly. I guess I'll be stuck here with you lot. Ryrika scowled angrily. What point is there in even winning for you then? Point? Well, I guess you could say that my friends will be saved. That was also a crucial goal of mine. And if this is the cost, then I will gladly pay it. Ryrika watched the man turning to the controls he was trying to make work, sighing. You're doing it wrong. You'll helping me? Miss Doggan asked, not even looking up from the controls. I can't stop you here, can I? And besides, I'd rather not have our worlds imploding or something because a novice like yourself decided to mess around with dimensional magic he barely understands. You said it yourself, you're an expert on stopping anima. This is opening one. She sighed again. If this is our eventuality, then we might as well get it over with. Wouldn't that be against your king's wishes? Yeah, which is why I want to make a deal with you. Miss Doggan turned back round, leaning back against the desk as he brought a hand up to his chin in thought. So what is it that you want? I can't allow magic to stay in this world, so you'll have no luck there. No need for that. Ryrika quickly said what she wanted, Miss Doggan frowning at hearing it. Is that acceptable? I don't like it. But I'll agree. He quickly walked over to Ryrika before picking her up and placing her down on a chair near the controls. You know which control is which. What is it that you want to do? I need to send a message. Just open a tier right above where you did it when you stole the magic from Earthland. We can do the rest once that link is open. Well, first start with that button there. Protector of the Fairies. Kyan felt a fist hit against him from behind, knocking him down onto one of the floating islands. He turned back in time to see Ichigo softly land of the island, looking around almost nostalgically. This is Extalia if I remember correctly, or what must remain of it. Ichigo brought a hand up to his eyes as he leaned forward slightly, looking into the distance. So that must be the remains of the city. Man, it has been a while since you exterminated almost all of them. Ichigo shrugged. Don't look at me so harshly. I gave them a chance. I told them to surrender, that pretending to be almighty would end up being their downfall. It is not my fault that they didn't listen. If I had waited any longer, then they would have foolishly gone to war against me, so I took preemptive measures. Some still lived. Ah yes. My kindness though was met with anger. I could have wiped them all out if I wanted. I shot them down from the skies and tore through all their defenses, and they believe that some of them managed to escape. Ichigo chuckled. Don't be ridiculous. And the ones I did spare now turn against me. I suppose this is what I get for being too beneficent with them. Kyan brought up Zanjutsu in front of him, energy spiraling off him in waves. I've had enough of this. Bankai. Ichigo took a frightened step back for a moment as he felt the tremendous amount of magic being released, and he knew it would have been more impressive too if Kyan wasn't so low on magic. So this is what you held back when you fought me. Bankai. You were always so vague on what it was. The black energy vanished to reveal Kyan clad in his Bankai's black outfit, his sword by his side with the usual chain on it. He took a step forward before vanishing, Ichigo rapidly using Hirin Kyaku to avoid the sudden strike that slashed at the ground in front of him. He was barely leaving his use of Hirin Kyaku when Kyan was already at him again, slashing down at his sword and breaking it in half. Before Kyan could attack again, Ichigo sped away, using quick bursts of Hirin Kyaku in an attempt to confuse Kyan at where he was going. This was dangerous. He had been satisfied with the direction the battle had been going before, but now Kyan had the upper hand in speed, and it wasn't something he could match. The wider area would also make it easier for Kyan to use it just like he was now. He had wanted to avoid resorting to this. No choice. He could no longer afford to try and fight at close range like he had been. His powers were based off the Quincy of Kyan's world, and there was an old saying they used to say according to records. A Quincy only uses bows and arrows. He reappeared, holding his hand out as energy gathered around his pendant. It branched off, following the lines of the pendant and extending into a large spider web-like bow. Jinrei Kojaku. He had managed to master the original form, Kojaku, long ago, and this was the upgraded version and the last version he would be able to make due to the demands required of those after this version. It was more than enough though. Pulling back at a string of magic, a small arrow appeared along on the bow, also comprised of magic the same color as the bow. Kyan appeared in front of him and he fired, the arrow striking him and sending him back a step in surprise. Ichigo took the opportunity to put more distance between them. A bow was always best as range after all. That's new, called Kyan, examining the bow. When you learn that? I always knew it. I simply held back when we last fought, just like you did. An arrow formed on the bow, Ichigo pulling it back. These arrows have a very unique name. Heilig Feel. The arrow shot forward at an alarming speed. It wasn't fast enough in Kyan's eyes, simply stepping to the side as it flew past. It doesn't matter how special they are, it is like the situation before with the Getsuga Tenshou against you. If it can't hit, it won't work. Are you sure on that? As Ichigo released the next arrow, Kyan sensed the sudden increase in the magic as it spiked, quickly dodging backwards as Ichigo released the arrow. Instead of one arrow, however, it was 50. Ichigo watched from his position as Kyan retreated backwards while dodging the arrows. That was the reason Jinrei Kojaku was superior to Kojaku. That bow could only fire one arrow at a time. This version not only had more power able to be channeled through it, but, through a similar method, it could also release multiple arrows at once. It was his best attempt at using a technique known as clavier, though that was a much more advanced technique with a more physical bow, as the one he was using right now was designed to replicate the ability for easier use later. Kyan shot forward past the last arrows and closed the gap as Ichigo fired off more, slashing at him. Ichigo blocked with the energy from the bow, proving it was much stronger than it was with the sword. He quickly went backwards with Hirin Kyaku as he gathered energy into the bow. The max amount this bow can fire at once is 1200 arrows. Shall we see how fast you are? Kyan shot forward quickly as Ichigo released the arrows, already creating more and firing them off afterwards. This technique was Lick Dragon, one that worked perfectly with Jinrei Kojaku. He could simply rain down arrows at his enemy until they crumbled. A large black blast suddenly erupted in the center of the arrows, slashing outwards and destroying all the arrows in a wide arc. The moment it took to be refilled was more than enough for Kyan to make it through, prompting Ichigo to start turning and to force the new sets of arrows towards him. He was a second too slow, a blade forcing the bow to the side as the arrows were released, missing Kyan by an inch. As he tried to move his blade off the bow, however, it froze, strings of energy holding it in bay from Ichigo's fingers. Not able to drag the sword away easily, Kyan settled for a simply punch, Ichigo using the opening to move to the side and force the bow back up till it faced Kyan's chest and fired. Kyan got knocked back and released his grip on Tensou Zanjutsu before gripping the chain and dragging Ichigo forward towards his fist. Ichigo disengaged the Ransutenge at the last moment, vanishing in a burst of Hirin Kyaku as Kyan grabbed his sword back. A large set of arrows flew at him from the multiple sides as Ichigo quickly sped around him, Kyan swiftly striking them all down before they could hit him. Ichigo finally stopped as he released another Lick Dragon, hundreds of arrows continuously flying towards Kyan. Instead of simply blocking and looking for an opening like before, Kyan shot straight into the blast, rapidly striking down arrows as he got closer. Some hit, but they either merely scratched him or they just broke, not doing enough damage in the right areas to slow him down. Black energy wrapped around Kyan's blade before he swiped, the Getsuga Tenshou flying at Ichigo at a much greater speed than any Getsuga Tenshou he had witnessed before. Forced to put his whole attention on it, he ended the Lick Dragon and took control of the energy flying at him and broke it back down to simple Eternino. As it fell away, Kyan appeared right behind it, Tensou Zanjutsu being swung down and slashing across Ichigo's chest. Ichigo cried out in pain, quickly separating himself from Kyan with Hirin Kyaku, ignoring the additional pain he felt from the exertion the technique was putting on his injury. His left arm was having problems moving, and he didn't have any healing abilities to help with that. Slowly gathering magic correctly, he used Ransutenge for its original purpose. Strings wrapped around his arm and tightened, and he tested out the movement immediately after by raising his arm a few times. A bit stiffer than he would have liked, but it would do. The wound on his chest was another matter. He shrunk the strings to the size of threats as he quickly directed them across his wound, making a makeshift set of stitches across it to try and close up some of the wound. It was an ugly job, but it seemed to work. He wasn't losing as much blood as before. He straightened up, seeing Kyan watching him from the distance curiously. He must have seen the Ransutenge and thought it had been a defense move at the time, keeping his distance warily till he could work out what it did. It looked like he had realized it was just the same technique as before though and was preparing to charge. No choice, Ichigo muttered, reaching out for the magic around him as he forced his body to draw it all in. Kyan saw the action and sped towards him, but it was too late. A large burst of energy shot out from Ichigo into the sky and spread outwards, forcing Kyan back from the strength of it. It slowly calmed down before Ichigo appeared again, donned in silver armor with blue markings along it in the shape of crosses. A metallic object rested on his right shoulder while a new bow was held in Ichigo's hands, this one more like a regular bow except for still being made of a hardened form of energy. From the object on Ichigo's shoulder sprouted a wave of energy, making it look similar to a quiver in function. Ichigo looked around before his fist clenched, the only sign he was doing something as large amounts of energy were drawn into the quiver, increasing the size of the energy within. The more he did so, the more Kyan noticed a certain factor appearing. Cracks. What is that form? Asked Kyan, his sword up ready. Quincy, let's still. Your body can't handle it. Stop it. You think I don't know that? Ichigo looked down at the cracks spreading along his skin. I wonder how long I can keep this up. I've never used it outside of training, and even then it was a simple activate and fire. Ichigo sighed. It's a shame I am unable to hold magic inside me like you can. If I could then this form would be no trouble, but, as it is, I need to be constantly drawing in magic to my body and releasing it around me, and that puts a strain on my body. Fine then. I'll force you out of that form before it is too late. Too late? For which of us? Ichigo held out his left hand as energy flew from the quiver and shaped into an arrow. Kyan shot forward as the arrow was docked but couldn't stop it being released, and instead went to swing at it. While his sword did break the arrow apart, he was unprepared for the intense force within it to be released and to send him flying back. Ichigo took advantage of that, firing 2 more arrows in quick succession. They were much faster than any others that he had fired, Kyan barely able to dodge the first, and that also put him directly in line of the second shot as it sent him flying back further, burns on his Bankai's outfit. Ichigo marveled in the power the Hylic feel possessed in this form. It was far greater than anything he was familiar with, and he supposed he would have this fight to thank for that. He had never pushed this form so far. He rushed forward with Hyrenkyaku, finding the gathering rate for the technique far superior to his previous attempts with it. He moved much faster, and because of that he could dodge the strike that came at him from Kyan. Kyan was fast, his Bankai gave him a lot of speed, but he was close enough now that the distance in skill between the two wouldn't matter. He brought up another arrow as Kyan tried to close in and shot, impacting against Kyan and launching him backwards as the arrow exploded. As he went to draw another arrow, he stopped. His arm had frozen for a second in shock, feeling something he had never felt before, or at least not this strongly. He had known that his brother could do what he could. The fact that he had broken out of the cell showed that. But it wasn't meant to be this strong of a feeling. Not this early. The magic that had always responded to his will suddenly felt confused, and he could feel his access to it weakening. Maybe it was the use of Kyan's Bankai that was the cause of this. It was allowing him to access the magic around them more easily, and if left long enough it might even exceed his own. For now he still majority of the magic around them on his side. He knocked the arrow, drawing the string back as he looked towards Kyan. The last of the smoke cleared to reveal a white mask with red markings on his brother's face, and he could see the faint lines of cracks on his brother's skin. Looks like neither of us can last for very long with what we are doing, commented Ichigo. I have to say that the mask is a bit intimidating. What exactly is it? That's not important. Kyan's voice sounded more echoed, though Ichigo noticed how it seemed to fail near the start, as if trying to get the right sound for it. Ichigo released the arrow he had drawn the moment Kyan vanished, hitting Kyan as he reappeared inches away from him. The blast didn't stop Kyan like before, simply smashing through the energy. Ichigo knew better at what was happening though. It was a similar, if not a very crude and weak version of what he did to deal with the Getchuga Tenshao. He made the energy side with him and break apart, though he saw the new burns which proved it only did so much. And yet he still felt like it should have done more. He fired another arrow, but this one was sliced in half, Kyan appearing in front of him and slashing down at him. Ichigo brought the bow up as a defense and was forced to release it a second later when the sword slashed through it. Without missing a beat, Ichigo created a new weapon. Instead of a bow though, he went back to basics. He had enough speed to keep up now, and he needed a more durable weapon to stand up against Kyan's sword's power. A large broadsword of pure energy formed in his hands, all the energy stored in the quiver poured into its form to increase its density and power, and then he swung it. He felt it hit the blade and, for a moment, he saw Kyan's eyes widen in fear. Before he could continue, Kyan had shot away, giving them a wide berth between one another. Kyan slowly looked back down at Tensou Zanjutsu, bringing the blade up to inspect what he had seen. When those two blades had clashed, he had heard the tiniest of sounds. The sound of something cracking. And there it was, a tiny innocent cut into his Bankai's blade, down near the hilt of the sword. Leaving the mask on, he let his Bankai vanish, conserving what little power he would have left after releasing it. He had gotten a bit extra back during the time with the mask on, but now it would only delay his losses, not allow him to gain any more magic. "What's wrong?" Ichigo called out, taking a few steps towards Kyan. He didn't want to rush in case it was a trap. "Why did you remove your Bankai?" "I don't need it to defeat you," Kyan lied. He couldn't help it. He wasn't sure on what was going on, and he didn't want to use his Bankai and further if it could be damaged as it had been. He didn't know why, but something screamed at him to not let any more harm happen to it. There was only one alternative left. Kidu. He had been able to steal magic from his brother before, so all he had to do was neutralize his brother's ability to steal his own. But first he needed to test that theory. And he could do that with an old classic. Bringing Zanjutsu up, yellow light glowed along it. Hada number 32, Bukansen. Ichigo looked on in surprise before reaching out with a hand to grab the attack. Kyan forced his will against it, and Ichigo's eyes widened as he found himself unable to steal the energy of the attack, bringing his hand back before it was too late. It scrapped his side, making him quickly move towards Kyan. He wasn't the only one acting though, and he noticed too late the remains of the light converging on him. Bakuda number 61, Ryukujukura. Ichigo struggled against the bonds, finding them weaker than he expected as they slowly started to break. It seems his brother's power wasn't so strong on holding the spells up against his power if he split his focus, something he could see being done now. He broke the bars of light only for them to reform just as quickly into chains that wrapped around him tightly. Bakuda number 63, Sajusabaku. He looked back at Kyan and already saw him casting a new spell, chanting an incantation. He struggled with the bonds, but they didn't break easily, and he saw why as he looked directly at Kyan. Kyan was focusing on him to make sure he had the time needed. Sprinkled on the bones of the beast. Sharp tower, red crystal, steel ring. Move and become the wind, stop and become the calm. The sound of warring spears fills the empty castle. A large orb of lightning generating into Kyan's hand, and Ichigo saw it get aimed directly at him. Hada number 63, Reikau Urhau. The lightning burst forward, slamming into Ichigo. Kyan let out a sigh of relief only to cough harsh as a blade cut into his side. Ichigo stood there, disappointment on his face. "You let up at the last moment. Doing so meant your attack became meaningless. How much magic do you even have left at this point?" "It can't be much." "It's not," said Kyan, clutching the sword, stabbing into this side even as it started to burn his skin. He didn't feel as much pain from it as he expected, and he wasn't sure why. He missed the faint blue lines across his skin as a consequence. His focus kept on the blade as he dug it further into his side. Ichigo tried to pull the blade back only for Kyan to latch his other hand onto him, his palm pressed against Ichigo's back. "Yeah, Lord. Mask of blood and flesh, all creation, flutter of wings, yeah, who bears the name of man?" Ichigo swore, trying to break free. He abandoned his grip on his sword, but that only led to Kyan grabbing him tighter, blue energy gathering under the palm pressed against Ichigo's back. On the wall of blue flame, inscribe a twin lotus. He understood now why his brother had cast all those Kidoo. The first was to test if it would work. The rest were merely to draw him in for one he would be unable to avoid. And he had been willing to take a hit like that in order to ensure it would hit. In the abyss of conflagration, wait at the far heavens. The energy was ready to burst and he couldn't steal any of it. He wasn't a fool. This was it. He just hoped Let's Still would last till the blast ended so he wouldn't just die. Heida number 73, Sauren Sukatsui. At the last second Ichigo felt the hand on his back move, the blast being aimed further downwards to the ground. It tore through the island and sent them tumbling down in the air, falling towards the ground below. That didn't mean Ichigo hadn't been hit. He already felt the pain as he forcefully ended Let's Still and barely had the energy to move. He felt an arm grab him before they vanished, crashing instead onto the edge of a small floating island nearby. Kyan crashed further to the side as he released his grip, both simply laying there helplessly. The mask on Kyan's face broke apart and the cracks on his skin slowly seemed to calm down and close up, the ones on Ichigo's skin doing the same now that Let's Still was over. Neither could move however, Kyan exhausted from the lack of magic left if any was still there at all and Ichigo from the effects of absorbing so much magic in Let's Still. You could have just killed me there, stated Ichigo, his head turning awkwardly to where Kyan was lying. And I decided to let you live. Because we're brothers. Kyan remained silent, causing Ichigo to laugh hard enough to cause it to aggravate his injuries. I believe that is the first time you ever truly regarded me as your brother without being reluctant about it. I've been exposed to you for 6 months now. People can grow on you. They can. Ichigo turned his head to look down at the city below. So in the end it seems like I lose. That's a shame. Yeah. And the others down there will win against your knights. I know, muttered Ichigo. I can sense them. Some of them are gone while others are weak. Ichigo sighed. Magic truly will leave this world. I kind of wish you had killed me. Why? Why? It's because I don't think I can live in a world without magic. Kyan frowned. Don't be so negative. It won't be as bad as you think. Tell me, can you even sense what I can? He looked at Kyan before shaking his head. I know you can't. Your little dragon slayer friend sees more clearly than you do, even if you have finally grasped a tiny bit of what you should know. Ichigo sighed. Everyone who mattered to me died so early, and I ended up in Earthland by chance. But despite all that, I was never alone. From birth it was there, and once I went to that place I realized the truth. I had never been lonely because magic had always been by my side, guiding me as I went if I ever needed help. Place. Kyan struggled to get closer as he listened. What place? Ichigo smiled fondly. The Holy Palace. The Holy Palace? Are you making this stuff up? Laugh all you want but at least listen. You will one day go there, that much I am sure of, and then you will understand why I was so desperate to stay in a world of magic. He let out a sad laugh. I wish I had been born in your world. It was so rich in magic and yet I knew it was not right of me to stay. They already had you there and I realized something had to be done about this world. We didn't need more magic, we just needed to keep what we had left safe. Then why didn't you use the magic in this world to seal off the dimensions? I could have, but that meant we would have nothing left. I am sorry I tried to use your friends but that is the only part I am sorry for. I am not kind enough to the people of your world to not sacrifice them if it meant the safety of mine. You won't be able to now. The magic of this world will vanish. I know. At least there will be no more people like me and my knights. I already gathered them all together and the ones who remain will be ordinary after this. They can't be killed for being different. Was it bad for them? Ichigo glanced at him in annoyance. Some were terrified because of their abilities while some were simply living boring lives. Senna wanted to be remembered, Dawn wanted to be a hero, Shuakura wanted to be part of a good story, Sujiro wanted people to free him from his loneliness, Nozomi wanted to be with her brother safely, and Ririka wanted to simply not be alone and to be with others like herself. And all of them were a result of the reckless use of Faust with the anima. So yes, it was bad for them, some more than others. Kyan sighed. They would have been just the people to join Fairy Tail then. If it was so bad, then you should have dragged everyone to our world and done what Miss Doggin did. And abandoned our home. Ichigo laughed. There was no way we could do that. Miss Doggin was brave to stop Anima as he did, but he was also a coward. He ran away from his world and stayed away. But it was what he wanted. Maybe. And this is what I want. Ichigo pushed against the ground and forced his body to roll straight off the edge. Kyan was already pushing his exhausted body to its limits as he lunged, grabbing Ichigo's hand before he fell. Are you an idiot? Let me go, Ichigo muttered dejectedly. Before you suck all the magic from this world, let me fall and vanish while it still is here. I told you it would have been better to have killed me with that spell. No way, said Kyan, clutching Ichigo's hand tightly. Give me your other hand. We can find a solution. If you're so desperate, then I'll drag you back to our world too. Ichigo smiled and said, You are too kind, brother, before a dagger of energy appeared in his free hand and he slashed at Kyan's own. Kyan pulled back, but the blade slashed at his skin, forcing him to lose his grip as Ichigo's hand fell through his own. He tried to grab it back in time, but it was too late, Ichigo far too low down to be able to grab. Light gathered around Ichigo, begging to help him. He let his feelings spread into the magic there to help him, giving it one simple message. To stay with him till the end. He felt it wrap round him as he fell, smiling happily. Sorry, my knights. For some of you, we will part ways here. For others, maybe I'll see you soon. And as Ichigo hit the ground, a large sound was heard, the sky splitting open with boom as a giant crack appeared above everyone before the sound of a voice sounded through it. Hello. Anyone hear me? Protector of the fairies. To the sky and back home. Kisuk tapped away at the monitors around him, fiddling with different devices and examining different readings. He stopped for a moment as he reached for the large bottle nearby, taking a swig of the liquid inside before he refocused on the task ahead of him. It had been almost 2 weeks. 2 weeks and still nothing. And until he heard something from Miss Doggin, he could do nothing but wait. He glanced at the screens of the monitors once more, large amounts of data scrolling past rapidly that few could understand without knowing what it meant. He had seen the same results appearing again and again and still nothing had changed. And that was the problem. What was happening in Edalis? He knew they might take some time, but it couldn't stop him from worrying. He just kept running through scenario after scenario through his head as he waited for their signal. It was a relatively simple thing to recognize for him. Miss Doggin would open up Anima to the same destination as before, and then he would act, taking control from his end and forcing the magic back to their side. But he couldn't do that without the signal from Miss Doggin. Well, that wasn't exactly true. The problem came from if he would even get the world of Edalis. There was a low chance really, since his Anima would have been inferior as a copy and thus wouldn't have the same guarantee of location as theirs did. It was why he had to just wait. He reached again for the bottle, shaking it a bit when he noticed the weight of it. He was running out again. That wasn't too much of a problem. He had about 20 more of these things. It was a concoction, made with the primary purpose of keeping the user awake. It was like caffeine except on a much larger scale. A faint presence appeared on the edge of his senses. He glanced around, not seeing anything yet. He had relocated away from Magnolia after sending Ichigo and the others and had set up his equipment where Ichigo's house was meant to be. It was a precaution mostly in case anyone came looking, and he couldn't waste time if he was caught here. He tugged his cloak further around him, making sure it was shutting off the presence his magic could give off. The person approaching didn't seem to halt, and they were heading to him too. His hand slowly lowered till it touched the hilt of his Zanpakuto, patiently waiting for the person to get closer. And as they did, he let out a sigh of relief, his hand falling away from the hilt as he turned back to the monitors. Nothing new on them, so he hadn't missed anything, it seemed. The sound of someone moving appeared behind him, but he didn't bother to face the intruder. He simply called out to them. Good to see you again, Yuriuki. Kisuk. The purple-haired woman sauntered up to the desks he had set up, jumping up onto it as she sat down on the edge. It's been a while. It has. We last met. Kisuk struggled to find the answer for a second. I'm not sure actually. At least 11 years ago, but it could be longer. 15 years. 15 fucking years. Ah. It really has been that long. Time flows by, doesn't it? Yuryuki scowled. It does. Maybe that explains why you never contacted anyone in that time. Me, Ishine, anyone who knew you has lacked any contact with you, especially after you took Ishine's kid from him. It was his choice. Yeah. But it's very surprising that you were there to take him. Almost like you had prepared for it. She saw no response from Kisuk, so she tried to keep pushing. I wonder how much Ishine hates you. It does seem very suspicious that you were able to take Ichigo right after his mother died. 2 days. Yuryuki frowned. What's that supposed to mean? It means that is how long it was before I approached Ichigo after Masaka's death. Like that makes it better. Why are you here, Yuryuki? Yuryuki pouted, leaning forward. Is it wrong of me to try and visit an old friend? You had no idea I was here, so don't use that excuse. You're just very good at acting like you expected to find me here. Kisuk looked up from his work to stare coldly at her. So who sent you? The Magic Council. Magnolia vanished, Kisuk. Thousands of people are presumed dead right now, or at least missing. You think this wouldn't be taken seriously? You have done a lot of things in your life, but I never believed you could do something like this. I didn't do it. Yuryuki looked unconvinced. If I had, would I stick around? Would have even risked detection? That new chairman guy doesn't know I'm here. No one does except for a few members of Fairy Tail. Then who? I'm sure it'll all be in the report. Kisuk. Kisuk frowned at the warning tone in Yuryuki's voice. It is too much hassle to go into details. Alternative world, magic stolen, team sent to rescue everyone. Is that enough for your superiors? These superiors were once yours, you know. You could have a little respect. Kisuk laughed. These people? Juoshiro had my respect, but don't think I respected any of the others. And don't think that respect always translated into obedience. Fine then. Yuryuki leaned forward towards the monitors. What's all this stuff then? Readings. Stuff which I need to keep checking until a signal appears. That sounds time-consuming. What if you need to sleep? I don't. Huh. Yuryuki stared at him before her eyes latched on the bottle. Is that another of your experimental drugs? It keeps me awake. That's all that's important. Yuryuki shrugged. Your choice. Let Ichigo know he'll be expected to appear before the Magic Council when he gets back. I'm sure they will sort something out, but it is worth being aware of that happening. They'll want information on what happened after all. You've got a lot of faith in him. What makes you think he'll return? Because Ishine will kill you if he doesn't. And if you're here, then he was part of the team you sent. You wouldn't be here otherwise if he wasn't involved. Yuryuki glanced at the man again. Besides, you'll have trained him to a decent level. You aren't worried, so there is no reason for me to be. Speaking of training, I heard you got hold of some students. Yuryuki gave him a look of disbelief. How the hell do you even know that? I keep track of things. Never mind, I don't want to know anymore. Yuryuki got to her feet. I'll show you I was right when they're strong enough. Kisuk's eyes flickered upwards, glancing at Yuryuki as she started walking away. Are you still persisting in that method of yours? I told you once, didn't I? Unity isn't the key. Teamwork is. I see. Good luck with that then. Yuryuki made to vanish before stopping, looking back one last time. It was good to see you again, Kisuk. You too, Yuryuki. She vanished, likely heading back to the Magic Council from what Kisuk guessed. Now that they had some information, they'd be here within a day or two most likely, taking into account travel time for Yuryuki, which wasn't much anyway. He would rather not be there when they showed up. He wouldn't put it past them to force him back into service like they did with Ishine. His eyes scanned the screen, taking another swig of the drink. It seemed like he was building up an immunity to the drug. He'd need to redesign it after this if he wanted it to work again, or perhaps just find a way to destroy the antibodies that were stopping it. Either worked. He almost choked on the drink, spitting some out as he saw the result on the screen. It was tiny, but it was there. A fluctuation in the air above Magnolia. He latched onto it, adding power from his side to widen the gap as he rapidly entered commands into his consoles. He brought up one device and checked it was working before he smiled, bringing it up to his mouth as the gap between dimensions fully opened. Hello. Anyone hear me? Protector of the Fairies. Mist Ogden fiddled with the controls in front of him, Ryrika pointing out the mistakes he made as he did so. One last button press and he let a smile come to his face as the devices burst to life, sending the signal to Anima to open. That's impossible, muttered Ryrika as the Anima shot open the moment it begun. It can't have opened that fast. It takes at least an hour to do so. We've got a genius on our side, said Mist Ogden, just in time for a voice to sound through the sky. Hello. Anyone hear me? You got a way to communicate with Earthland? Asked Mist Ogden. Ryrika frowned before gesturing with her head towards the desk. Second draw on right. Grab the lacrima. Mist Ogden did as she instructed, activating the device and hearing a quick buzz sound come from the lacrima. Hello? He asked slowly. Ah. Well, hello, Mist Ogden. Good to hear from you. Mist Ogden sighed in relief at hearing the man's cheerful response. Thank God. You can hear us. I certainly can. It's echoing all the way from the Anima over Magnolia. I've got a transmitter helping to boost the signal back to me and I've turned my volume up to max so I can be heard clearly. Is everyone safe down there? They should be. Can you do it? Do what? Kisuk said teasingly. Come on, you know. Send the magic back. He couldn't see it but he could tell Kisuk was laughing in the small chuckles coming from the man's end. Oh fine then. But how do you expect me to do such a thing? It's not like I have a device here ready to reverse the effects, search for all sources of magical power, and then suck them upwards. Oh wait. I do. The sound of a lever being flipped sounded through the Anima before trails of light appeared around them, all flowing upwards through the roof of the tower. Mist Ogden looked at the remains of the magical tools before sighing, getting up from his seat. He was about to leave when Kisuk spoke again. Thank you, Mist Ogden. Mist Ogden sighed. Kisuk knew it seemed, or maybe he had already predicted the outcome. He wouldn't be returning with them. Make sure Fairy Tail gets back safe, Kisuk. Make sure of that. I will. Mist Ogden nodded, leaving the girls behind in the room. They wouldn't be able to stop Anima even if they tried to act without him there. Kisuk was latched onto the portal now and wouldn't let go any time soon. He had something very important to do before the end of his adventures with the others. He needed to say goodbye. Protector of the Fairies. Natsu and Happy quickly landed by the large tower, looking around for people. They had seen the lights going upwards and the sound of that Kisuk guy talking, so that had to be a sign that they had won, but where were the others? A victory didn't mean everyone was safe until he saw them with his own eyes. Gajeel. Wendy. Panther Lily. Over here. Natsu turned to see the group crouched behind some rubble, Wendy hard at work as she tended to the wounds they had gotten. Panther Lily gave them a smile as they approached, his eyes glancing up at the sky. It looks like we've won today. Yeah. Natsu observed each of them carefully. You guys don't look that badly hurt. We know, stated Gajeel in annoyance. Wendy healed up the minor stuff already. The girls now checking for any anomalies left over from the man's abilities. He messed around with our memories and Wendy is making sure nothing was left behind when it wore off with his death. Natsu's eyes glanced over to the fallen man nearby. He was your enemy then? Yeah. Gajeel raised an eyebrow. You disapprove? It was your fight. Why would I? I don't know. What about you? Who did you face? Natsu's shoulders sagged. A guy who didn't give up, even when he could no longer properly face me. That sounds like Dash. Something I would do too. Natsu nodded. Yeah. It was kind of strange, I would say, to fight him. I'm usually in his place except that I win. Gajeel leaned up, clamping a hand on Natsu's back. Don't get down in the dumps about this salamander. It'll be too easy to kick you out of the skies otherwise. Natsu smirked. We'll see about that, you iron bastard. A frown crossed his face as he looked around. What happened to Toshiro? I saw some of the trouble from a distance. He's okay, said Wendy. I treated some of his injuries and he went off straight afterwards. Said he had enough magic to fly now, so he was going to check on Ichigo. Natsu's eyes widened. He broke out. Wendy nodded. Yeah. I felt it at one point. I think he used his Bankai, but then his presence vanished a lot afterwards. And there was something else too. Something in the magic around us that was drawing it away towards where he had been fighting. It seemed excited? I think that is the best way to describe it. Looking up, Wendy pointed at the sky with a smile. But it's over now. We get to go home. True to her word, light shone around them and they slowly started rising into the air, heading up into the sky. They could see other figures in the distance where the same was happening to them. Some were even flying upwards, likely to be the Exceed. Natsu smiled. Home we go then. Let's hope everyone is nice and safe back there. Protector of the Fairies. Kyan held the pendant in his hands, sighing as he glanced at it. His brother had taken his off before falling, as if leaving a memento of sorts. He wanted to throw it away but he couldn't, instead slowly attaching it around his wrist with his own. His brother had been a fool. But at least he got his wish in some way. He got to live and die in a world of magic instead of being subjugated to a world without it. That was some mercy, he guessed. In some ways he could see why his brother had done so. He had gone out in a blaze, surrounded by magic till the end. He still didn't understand how his brother had been able to do what he had done, but perhaps he would one day. There was still that holy palace that his brother had mentioned. It had to be somewhere in Earthland, his brother's confession of it implied it as so. But what kind of place was it? If it was a palace, then he should have heard of it somewhere. The only palace he could think of though belonged to the king, and he doubted his brother had been able to go there. Holy implied a religious meaning. Could it have been related to the Zentopia Church? They were the only major religious group that people recognized in Fiori. There were others, but the Zentopia Church always absorbed them into itself. The church was a strange one, going as far as to almost be its own independent nation. Juoshiro had never allowed them that complete privilege though, allowing the Magic Council to still be able to monitor them. Dangerous was what Juoshiro had once described them as. Very dangerous. An organization like that could possibly have a few hidden secrets. Perhaps the Holy Palace was one of them. Ichigo. There was no time speculating. He could do that later. He turned just in time to see Toshiro half crash into the ground. The boy winced as he rubbed his head in pain. I swore I had more magic left than that. You okay? Toshiro nodded, looking intently at Kyan. I should ask you that. His eyes locked onto the wound in Kyan's side and he rushed over. What happened? No need to worry, protested Kyan, even as Toshiro ripped some of his sleeve off to act as a bandage. I'm fine, seriously. How did this not cut you through? I'll never know, muttered Toshiro. You're too reckless. You said yourself that you don't have your hollow powers working right now, so you need to be more careful. You can't die AGA-. Toshiro closed his mouth, realizing what he had been about to say. Kyan smiled at him, placing a hand on his head in a reassuring manner. Don't worry, Toshiro. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going to die. You better not. Toshiro turned away, distracting Kyan by pointing at the sky. You heard all that right? Yeah. Kisuke and Mistogen came through. Good thing too. Toshiro strained his eyes as he stared at some of the things flying towards the anima. I think that is the Exceed, or what is left of them. It's them, muttered Kyan, glancing at something else in the distance. Something that was getting too close for what he wanted. Light suddenly shone around them and he let out a sigh of relief as it began lifting them up towards the anima. They were almost home. Just a bit longer and... Kyan. Kyan winced, turning away as the people approached on a flying legion and not daring to show his face to them. Ah, said Toshiro, realizing what was going on. Kyukaku and Ganju. Yeah, muttered Kyan. They don't know. Bro. What's going on? Where are you going? Aren't you going to say anything? Asked Toshiro, glancing at his mentor in worry. Say something, Kyan. Shouted Kyukaku from behind them, their legion struggling to keep up. What's happening? Why is the anima taking you too? Kyan clenched his fists, struggling not to turn around. He couldn't. He was too ashamed to face them after lying for so long, and they would have now realized the truth with what was happening. And yet this was his only chance. He'd never be able to say goodbye if he didn't say it now. Kyan, please, answer us. Kyukaku tried to shout again before Ganju suddenly stopped her, Kyukaku looking at Ganju in shock before the expression slowly changed to realization. Ganju stood up straight on the legion, staring towards Kyan. He drew in air into his lungs before shouting at the top of his lungs. We'll miss you, bro. Kyan froze, his head half turning before he could even stop it. He could see Ganju there, tears falling yet still standing strong and smiling as happily as he could. Yeah, said Kyukaku, shouting upwards. Don't worry about us. We're more than capable of watching our own backs. You too, muttered Kyan, properly turning to face them now. I'm sorry. What for? Asked Ganju. I don't see anything you did wrong, bro. You never lied about your feelings to us. We're still family. Isn't that all that matters in the end? And don't forget us, added Kyukaku. Because this won't be goodbye. Let's just say it's a farewell for now. Kyan brought a hand up to his face, quickly rubbing away a few of the tears threatening to fall. You two better not get in any more trouble. No forcing anyone else into rebellion groups. Once is more than enough. Kyukaku and Ganju smirked, Kyukaku slowly raising her cannon to the sky. We've got just enough juice in this left for one more shot before it loses its energy forever. Let's send you out with a bang, shall we? Pulling the trigger, a single blast of energy shot upwards before exploding outwards, sparking like a firework as the magic that made it up was taken as it exploded. Kyan smiled, raised a hand in farewell as the two slowly lowered themselves downwards, still waving. Shibas till the end. Shouted Kyukaku. Don't you dare forget it, even if you go back to being who you were before. You are always a Shiba like we are. If you two can deal with it too, then fine. Kyan gave one last wave before they were too low down, sighing sadly. You'll miss them. Yeah, said Kyan. They have their quirks, but they were nice people. Kept me company my first year here despite losing more peaceful life they could have had instead. I'll never be able to repay them for that, and they'll never ask me to either. Kyan sighed again. All things end. Time to head home. Hey, said Toshiro suddenly, pointing at a person above them on a legion. Isn't that Miss Dogen? Kyan nodded as he saw the man, realizing he was waiting for them up there. Natsu and the others slowly were drawn to them as the paths of energy converged, all slowly heading upwards to Miss Dogen. Glad you could make it, said Natsu happily. Want us to grab you, Miss Dogen? It doesn't work like that, said Miss Dogen with a trace of amusement in his voice. But I'm afraid this is where we part ways. Part ways? Natsu frowned. What are you talking about? Miss Dogen gestured around him. I am stuck here now. I no longer have the item I was going to use to get back. You're stuck, said Wendy, his hands by her mouth in shock. You can't be. Yeah, said Gajeel. There has to be a way. What about the cracks we saw? I know some of them were dangerous, but it could be possible. Not enough time, said Miss Dogen seriously. I had to see you all off though. We swore we would all meet again after the battle. I'm fulfilling that promise. Miss Dogen glanced around the rows of mages before slowly addressing each one in turn. Natsu. It was nice to have met you. Despite your rowdy personality, I was surprised how easy I could interact with you, despite having barely any interaction with you beforehand. I'm glad to be able to call you a friend now. It'll have come a lot better if you didn't put us all to sleep every time you entered the guild. Miss Dogen laughed. I suppose it would have. He slowly turned towards Gajeel. We had some fun breaking into the tower, didn't we, Gajeel? I know it was dangerous and scary at one part, but it was fun. I've rarely gone on missions in a team and I feel like I should have done it so much more. I'll admit it, muttered Gajeel. I had fun there. Thanks for that. Miss Doggan nodded, turning to Wendy. It's a shame I won't be able to see you anymore, Wendy. You know I did drop by at Kate's shelter from time to time. I stayed hidden, always making sure to never cross any part of your vision and settled for just watching from far. I had to make sure you were okay after all, after my harsh abandonment of you. Miss Doggan dropped his head. I am sorry I did that. I can lie all I want and say it was forced, but I can't lie now when I won't ever get a chance to be truthful again to you. I did it because I was afraid you would be a burden at the time. I was young, and I am so sorry for my ignorance. It's all right, said Wendy softly, smiling as wide as she could in an attempt to cheer Miss Doggan up. I knew, or at least I think I had my suspicions about it. And it was unfair of me too. Oh, it never was, argued Miss Doggan. Make sure you're okay. Be nice to the other me. I'm sure you have been, but he'll have to be enough for both of us Jellals now. Miss Doggan looked towards Carla. You'll look after her, won't you? Of course, said Carla proudly. Happy puffed out his chest too. I'll help. I'm already looking after Natsu as well. Thanks. That's a weight off my mind. Turning attention to Panther Lily, Miss Doggan sighed sadly. I'll miss you, my old friend. And I too, my prince. That title is far too old now, Lily. Panther Lily smiled. That is still what you were back then. Thank you for saving me all those years ago. I wouldn't be alive if it wasn't for you. It was my pleasure. Nodding, Miss Doggan turned to Toshiro. What to say to you, Toshiro? We never knew each other very long, so dash. Don't worry about me. I'll still try. Miss Doggan brought a hand to his palm as an idea clicked. Ah, I know. Sorry for making you panic when I thought Ichigo was dead. I'll admit you impressed me, despite your age. I know Wendy's the same, but you are one focused individual. I wish you all the best in the future. Something tells me it will be needed with how Fairy Tail is. Finally turning to Kyan, Miss Doggan nodded. Thank you for all your help here. I'm sorry I tripped on the way here. Don't worry about it. It all turned out fine in the end. Perhaps it was simply what was meant to happen. Miss Doggan smiled. Perhaps. Though now I find myself without the need to hide behind a mask. I no longer need to be Miss Doggan any longer. I can be Jellal once again. How's it feel? The same as it must feel to you to be going back to Ichigo. Good then. Miss Doggan grabbed his mask before throwing away into the air. Tell the Jellal of your world that, if he needs a way to reinvent himself, the name Miss Doggan may serve him well. It did for me, so it is only right to pass it on to someone who now needs it. Kyan nodded. I'll let him know. Good. Miss Doggan raised a hand to the sky as the group overtook him, his legion no longer flying upwards towards the anima. Go back home. Say goodbye to everyone else for me. Kyan exchanged a look with Natsu before they both shouted out to him as one. You're forgetting something. Miss Doggan froze, looking up at them in shock. What? One. Shouted Kyan. You must never reveal sensitive information about Fairy Tail to others for as long as you live. 2. Continued Natsu. You must never use former contacts met through your being in the guild for personal gain. Miss Doggan smiled at the two, began the final line in unison. 3. Though our paths may have diverged, you must continue to live out your life with all your might. You must never consider your own life to be something insignificant. And you must never forget about your friends. For as long as you live. Shouted Miss Doggan as he finished the rules. It was standard for anyone leaving Fairy Tail, and he smiled even as he felt tears in his eyes. And don't you forget it, shouted Natsu. We'll all meet again one day. So let's look forward to that day. Miss Doggan smiled. Goodbye, my fellow mages, my friends, my family. Goodbye, Fairy Tail. The group shot through the anima before it snapped shut. The world of Edelas finally drained off all magic. Only then did Miss Doggan freely let the tears fall. I wanted to go back with you all so much. I'll miss every single one of you. He raised his arm up as he rolled back the sleeve, staring at the fairy tale mark hidden beneath it. Goodbye everyone. I'll just hope we one day can meet again. Now was time for different tasks however. They had a city to sort out. His father would know how to do that. It was time for peace in this non-magic world. Protector of the fairies. The sky seemed to open up before them as the group came flying out of the anima. The clouds were much clearer than before when anima had first been used, and they could see the sun shining above them. In the distance was what they had set out to save. Magnolia, back home safe and sound. Even without having to try they could sense the life bursting around the area, smiles coming to their faces. It was then they suddenly remembered what happened last time they went through the dimensions, and the fact that they were so close to the clouds seemed to scream to them in warning. Kisuk. A chuckle seemed to sound around them, a strange large white sheet of fabric wrapping around them as they fell before it crashed against the ground. Instead of crashing though, it simply stopped, as if they hadn't suddenly been falling hundreds of feet. The fabric rapidly unwrapped around them and hit the ground, clapping sounding nearby. They turned to see Kisuk there smiling. Lysina slightly collapsed on the ground nearby, clapping too with an amused look on her face from experiencing the fall herself. Well done, said Kisuk simply. I have to say I had my doubts about some of you, but you all pulled through. Congratulations. He stopped for a moment as he looked around, his eyes identifying they were one short as he had guessed. I am sorry about Miss Doggin, Kisuk added, bringing out a fan and hiding the lower half of his face behind it. Well, in the end there's nothing we can do about that. He was an interesting lad. Smart on dimensional magic. I'll miss his explanations on it, even if they were few and rare. Snapping the fan shut, Kisuk pointed it out dramatically towards Magnolia. Rejoice though. Everyone is back safe and sound. Sounds will be sung for these deeds. Or at least they should be, Kisuk said, muttering the last part quietly though they still managed to pick up on it. Who cares though? Go on, see if everyone is safe if you don't believe me. Yeah. Shouted Natsu, grabbing Lysina by her hand before dragging her along as he sprinted towards the guild. Let's go Lysina. Let's find Elfman and Myra. Hold on, Lysina protested as the two shot off, Gajeel shrugging as he slowly followed after them. May as well check up on the others. Maybe I can find some metal to eat. I'm starving. What about you, brat? He turned to Wendy who froze midway through scarfing down large volumes of air. I was hungry. He sighed. Just don't lower the air pressure too much around here. Wendy nodded, going back to enjoying her meal. It was so nice to eat the air back home. It was a nice feeling. She let Carla lead her along as they followed after the older dragon slayer, Toshiro staying put by Ichigo's side. This is good, muttered Ichigo. I can finally go back to being Ichigo again. Back to being Ichigo again. Kisuk frowned. What do you mean? Messed up on the way. Ended up a year and a half too early and even was part of a strange time loop that brought us here in the first place. Kisuk smirked. Nothing's normal with you, is it? The smirk slowly dropped as Kisuk bowed his head slightly. I'm sorry. The dango was dangerous and yet I send you that way. Ichigo shrugged. How else would I have gotten there? Caused a bit of extra trouble but it all worked out fine. If you're sure. Kisuk smiled again, reaching out a hand towards Toshiro. Your magic seems slightly different. Did Mayuri's work turn out to be helpful there? Toshiro looked away in a mix of annoyance and embarrassment. Yeah. That's good then. Don't ignore it. It's not hollow powers but it is still something unique to have. That reminds me, Kisuk, Ichigo said, raising his hand to his face and generating his mask. He quickly took it off and handed it over to Kisuk, the strain of using it barely noticeable when it wasn't actually being worn. Can you look at this for me? Kisuk twirled it around, giving it what could only be described as a passing glance to most. Ichigo knew better though. It was Kisuk's way of acting like he wasn't paying attention while secretly having already gotten half the info he needed. Well. What's the issue with it? My hollow powers aren't working properly. Indeed. Ichigo could swear he saw a strange look cross Kisuk's face for a moment. It was almost like shock. He didn't remember seeing Kisuk look shocked like this though. Puzzled at times, yes, but never that confused. "I'll look into it," muttered Kisuk, handing the mask back to Ichigo, where it then shattered into pieces. "I've memorized your magical signature, so I should be able to make a comparison with your old records and see what's wrong. It's probably just something to do with Edelas or something." The excuse sounded flimsy to Ichigo. Maybe it was the lack of effort Kisuk put into last sentence that made it not seem to ring very true. "Make sure you don't use your hollow mask in the meantime," added Kisuk urgently, his gaze glancing around as if he was uncomfortable with staying. "At least till I have some kind of answer." "I will." "Good." Kisuk glanced at the equipment around him before he snapped his fingers, the equipment vanishing in a flash of light. "I'll be off then. If there are any problems, let me know." "How the hell can I do that?" "Just wait around somewhere and flash your magic. I'll notice something off with it and come and find you. It's that easy." Kisuk shuffled awkwardly, clutching his fan tightly. "I'm staying a bit closer than I was before. I'll pick up on it if there are any problems." Ichigo felt like there was more to it, but he let it go, simply giving Kisuk a nod. "Thank you." Kisuk smiled. "No problem." And then he vanished, Shunpo taking him away from them rapidly. Ichigo sighed, looking at his house that was back in place before turning to Toshiro. "I think Shinji's asleep in there. No wonder he hasn't burst out yet. Let's let him rest." Ichigo nudged Toshiro. "You want to see some of the others at the guild?" "Yeah. You coming?" "Go on ahead. I'll catch up after I speak with Shinji." "Okay." Toshiro got to his feet and chased after the others, Ichigo waiting till the boy was gone before he walked over to the bushes nearby. It looked natural, but he didn't remember it being there, and he doubted Toshiro would have if he had paid enough attention. It was as if it was trying to be inconspicuous, and thus it was much more noticeable. He reached into the bush and moved some of it out the way as he glanced at what was in it before letting out a sigh. "Kisuk, you could have given me some warning here. What the hell am I meant to do with her? Protector of the fairies." Kisuk landed by the small shack he had been using recently, opening the door quickly and getting inside. It was fairly well hidden, and he had a ton of spells littering the place to divert unwanted guests, but it was still a hasty job. Anyone of significant strength could still find the place. The inside was mostly barren. He had yet to get anything to actually put in here, not that he needed much. He'd sort out a desk later though. For now he would sleep. Or at least he could have if he hadn't found someone already waiting for him there. He sighed, knowing he was in plain sight of the old man and that he had been spotted. He tried to play it off though as if he was a random passerby. My, what are you doing here, Master Makarov? You are Master Makarov, are you not? Cut the act, Kisuk." Damn, the man had recognized him. He dropped the act, reaching for his cloak as he pulled it off. He didn't need it inside the house anyway with all the spells around the place. It was annoying though that the master had found it, but then the man in front of him was very old now. Makarov may not have had as much battle experience, but he had a lot of skill in many different magic, and it seemed he knew how to recognize the spells in place and get past them. "Well then, I'll rephrase my first question. What are you doing here, master? You still dare to call me master after all this time? Like you are still part of my guild." Kisuk smiled goofily. "I don't remember you kicking me out. What did the words, 'I never want to see you again,' mean to you?" "Oh, them. I just thought you were mad at me. Parents get mad at their children after all." Makarov snarled. "You are no child of mine." Kisuk sighed. "Still holding that grudge against me, huh? I even heard you let it influence your view on my student. I thought you were smarter than that." Makarov ignored the jab at him. "What are you doing here in Magnolia?" "Well, technically I'm a few miles out." Makarov slammed a fist against the wall, his entire body shaking with anger. "I don't care about technicalities here. I told you one thing. To stay away. I told you to never return to Fairy Tail. A harsh punishment, I'll say, just for joining the Magic Council. You think it's for that?" Makarov laughed coldly. "No, it's for what you did in their service. Do you know the rumors about you back then? You know what people called you? The blood-soaked fairy. The fairy whose wings had been dyed red by the blood of all who got in its way, whether it was an enemy in a battle or a human in the way of scientific progress. That is why I couldn't stand to allow you to stay in my guild. Get to the point already, complained Kisuk, scratching the back of his head. I'm tired. I just want to sleep. Have you finished scolding me already? Will you stop treating this as a joke? Kisuk shrugged as he tried to pass Makarov and lie down on the ground. I don't see why this is so important here. I haven't caused you any problems, not today at least. Sorry about the Urza girl. I'm guessing you already had an idea I was there. I did. And don't bother with apologies you don't mean. I should inform the Magic Council on where you are. But you won't. After all, if you did I could always simply talk to them as they try to take me away. Like about a certain secret trapdoor under the guild hall? I do wonder what could be down there, but I was too young at the time to get past the barrier. And it was a very strong one. How suspicious. Makarov swore silently, allowing Kisuk past as he headed for the door. No trouble. This is your one and only warning. Otherwise I'll come back here and flatten this place to the ground, with you along with it. I missed you too. Called Kisuk cheerfully as the door slammed shut. He let the fake smile drop as he all but collapsed to the floor. The drug in his system was a pain when it finally wore off, and he had never felt so exhausted. That was the downside of staying on it for so long, to simply stay awake. He'd probably be asleep for the next day or two. And despite his state he had still tried to push the master's buttons. He guessed he would never change. He had been truthful when he had said about that trapdoor. He had no idea what was down there, but it had to be something either valuable or dangerous. Maybe both. He hadn't know if the threat was going to work when he said it, but it seemed Makarov truly didn't want it to be public knowledge. They had a deal so long as he didn't cause any trouble. Hopefully the master would listen to the other's story completely first and not assume he was responsible for the whole Edelis thing. Protector of the fairies. The girl in the cupboard. Well? What do you think? Shinji frowned, looking down at the blade that Ichigo had dropped into his lap. He carefully examined it, judging every detail and comparing it to what he was remembered it to look like. His eyes finally fell onto the crack in the blade before he slowly handed the blade back to Ichigo. My honest opinion. Ichigo nodded, causing Shinji to sigh. It's been damaged. What kind of person managed to do this? You remember hearing the stories from everyone who was conscious at Edelis. Shinji shrugged. I may have listened to the two squirts. You fought the Edelis version of you, didn't you? The king. Yeah. He managed to do this after entering some kind of absorption technique. Gave him a power, then managed to fight my Bankai. Really? Sounds strong. What did he call it? Quincy, let's still. Of course it would be a Quincy technique, muttered Shinji. They are meant to match us, and the dynamics of how their power works would easily allow one to become strong in Edelis. Shinji glanced back at the sword. Still, that's a lot of power he must have had if he was able to damage Tensou Zanjutsu. I stopped using it the moment it happened. I didn't want to risk fighting with it any further just in case. Shinji nodded in approval. You made the right choice. We're dealing with a dangerous situation here. The fact that the blade's crack is still here is proof of that. I noticed. Normally Zanjutsu repaired itself when I exited Shikai. I had hoped the same would have happened with my Bankai, but, despite that, I was worried. And right to be. You likely would have felt some kind of fear or warning of some kind. It's your instincts screaming at you to be careful. Well then, how do we fix it? Shinji sighed, shaking his head. We can't. Ichigo frowned. There has to be a way. There is, but it isn't an easy place to get to, and the guy there doesn't just repair Bankai for nothing. You need to prove yourself to him, and that's a hard thing to do when he already has a weak opinion of anyone whose Bankai breaks. Careless he'd call you, even if you couldn't help it. I don't understand though. Why can't we fix it ourselves? Did Kisuk never tell you? Ichigo hesitantly shook his head. Really? Must have not. Through it was worth knowing, and I'd agree after seeing what you Bankai is. Your Bankai's all compressed in that single blade after all. Reaching for his own Zanpakuto, Shinji held it in front of him. Okay, back to basics. Our Zanpakuto's sealed states can break and shatter, but it doesn't matter in the slightest. It can simply be repaired through adding magical power into the blade. Low-level stuff there. Placing his Zanpakuto down, Shinji held up a finger. Shikai, as we've covered, repairs when you leave Shikai, so there are no problems there either. The issue always comes from the Bankai. I trust you know the general basics about it. Ichigo scowled. Of course I do. It's 5 to 10 times stronger, and is also the ultimate form of all Zanpakuto. It's the full release of our very souls. You get it now. It probably never crossed your mind much since your Bankai never had a risk of being broken due to how compressed it was. The thing that cut it must have had an enormous amount of concentrated energy behind it to have even managed to crack the blade. It's why we also spend so long practicing with it. To make sure we can use it to its fullest potential, because the other possibility is a terrible one. And that is the Bankai breaking. Exactly. A broken Bankai will not mend by normal means. I don't even know what that guy does to repair them, but, from what I heard, the Bankai is never the same, whatever that means. Ichigo sighed as he let his Bankai fade, sparing one last look at the crack in the blade. So I should be careful with how much I use it. Yeah. Shinji frowned a bit, bringing a hand up to his chin. It still shocks me on how it broke though. Maybe it's the structural weakness now present in the blade, but it fells weaker magically. You said your hollow powers weren't working properly too. I can generate the mask, but I can't use anything else. No regeneration and no Sandio. Which means no Phantom Step too. Shinji shrugged. We'll get to the bottom of this soon enough. Sure, it wasn't anything to do with Daedalus. I'm sure. If anything, I've been feeling Ichigo was cut off as an intense pain ripped across his body, forcing him into a coughing fit. Shinji rushed over, holding him up as he fell, and the sound of a door being slammed open could be heard nearby. Another hand seemed to land on his shoulder, remaining until his coughing fit subsided. Sorry about that, muttered Ichigo. As I was saying, I've been dash. No, said Shinji stubbornly. We are not just ignoring what just happened. Those coughing fits have been getting worse. Ichigo sighed. They fits had been occurring every few hours since he had gotten back a day ago, each getting a bit worse than the previous one. He couldn't pretend it wasn't scaring him, but it was probably just a passing bug. The medicine Jalal had been getting him was helping too, though he couldn't really call the man by that name anymore. He had told Jalal about Mistogen's kind offer just after he had found the man when he had gotten back. Jalal had been ecstatic, wishing he could have thanked the original Mistogen personally. He had taken the name proudly too, and he had been trying more to interact with others now that he had the name to give him a new identity. Speaking of that man, he glanced to his left and nodded at Mistogen. Thanks, he simply said as he accepted the drink Mistogen had poured ready for him. Mistogen had told him that he had been getting the medicine from poor Lyusica, though he had also been forced to pass on a message to let him know to see a doctor if it didn't pass within the week. He drank down the drink, trying not to spit it back up. It had a terrible taste, but it did help with the pain the fits were causing. It felt sometimes like his entire body was trying to tear itself apart. He lowered the drink back down to the table only to have it intercepted by Mistogen, who quickly took it away and cleaned it. That was another of the chances Mistogen seemed to have made. Before he had been a bit unsure how to act. Now he seemed to act as a servant or butler at times, doing random odd jobs around the house without anyone asking. He had been doing the same around the guild, and people had started noticing and thanking him for them, but he was a lot more noticeable around the house they all stayed in. Even Levy's room was in a neat state, despite the amount of books present. And, to make it a bit stranger, the man had even added clothes to his look. He refused to budge on what he had chosen, sticking with smartly dressed suits that a butler would wear. Part of him wanted to blame Levy since she had encouraged him a bit, and Mistogen was still fairly impressionable at times. It also didn't help that Wendy seemed to love how he looked. Despite the strange attitude Mistogen had gained, the man was still quite nice to be around, even if he was giving him too much respect. Mistogen reapproached him and Shinji before sitting down near them, his hands on his lap. "I'll be fine," said Ichigo in an attempt to reassure Shinji. "Don't worry about me so much. I'll be fine in a few days. And you're proof for that." Ichigo's shoulders sagged. "See? Have you even seen anyone yet? I've got Miss Dogen getting me some medicine. I've been back a day, remember?" Shinji leapt up, grabbing Ichigo by one of his arms. "Come on, we're going to see someone." "Leave it," said Ichigo, more harshly than he meant to. "Just give it a few days. I'm sure it is just a small bug. I've been out of Earthland for a year and a half, remember?" Shinji released his grip, relenting for now. "Fine then, but we'll seeing someone if it hasn't cleared up within a few days." "Don't worry, I'll see someone soon enough." Shinji nodded, quickly heading out to the main door. Ichigo turned to Miss Dogen as Shinji left and gave him a nod in thanks. "We'll still okay for medicine, right? I don't want you to have to worry about going and getting more for me." "It is no problem," said Miss Dogen cautiously. "Sir dash. What did I say about the sir thing? If I remember correctly, Byakuya Kukaki said I was safe so long as I remained in your service, not protection. I believe I should give you some form of respect as a sign of that. I would appreciate if you didn't fight me on this. You can just ignore the title if it annoys you." "Fine. What was it that you were saying? Are you sure it is not wise to seek help just yet? I've seen you sneaking more of the medicine out when you think no one is looking. Speaking of which..." Miss Dogen stood up and quickly grabbed the glass, refilling it with the medicine and bringing it back to hand to Ichigo. Ichigo hesitantly reached for it before he didn't bother with pretending and quickly downed the whole thing, despite the bad taste it had. "See? I'm fine," muttered Ichigo. "With all due respect, sir, I am not sure that you are. It's not just stealing the medicine. It's the why. You stop trying to be strong when no one isn't looking. You look weak, sir." Ichigo slowly lowered his guard as he placed the glass back down, leaning against the back of his chair for support. He pulled back one of his sleeves, a large crack running along his skin. "A normal doctor can't exactly treat this. I need to wait for it to wear off before I see one." "Is it wise to wait?" "I don't have a choice. I think it's a side effect of being in Edalas for so long. My body is relearning how to adjust and adapt to the high levels of magic in the air. Or at least that's what I think it is. Why not tell Shinji? I don't want to worry him. You've already noticed, so there is no point keeping you in the dark here. I'm sure Wendy knows something is up too, but she hasn't confronted me on it yet. I have seen her applying her healing magic to you when you aren't looking. I think she is trying to help secretly since you refuse other methods. I noticed. It lessens the pain, I will admit that. It's why I haven't stopped her. A selfish request of mine, you could say." Ichigo glanced at the clock they had on the way, groaning as he saw the time. "Damn, I need to meet up with Levi soon. I should be able to hide the symptoms from the last attack easily enough if I have a bit more time." "Leave it to me," said Miss Dogen as he stood up. "I will go ahead and inform her that you will be late. Tell her I'll meet her at the markets," called Ichigo as Miss Dogen left. "Make sure she knows she can look around while she waits." "Yes, sir." Ichigo waited till he was sure Miss Dogen was far enough away before he sensed for anyone nearby. His ability had increased a bit from being in Edalas and spending 6 months with his powers mostly sealed away. It made it so much easier to find people if they were nearby. Taoshiro seemed to still be at the guild while Shinji was heading off somewhere. Where that place was he didn't know. Levi was by the guild too along with Wendy, and that left Miss Dogen heading to them now. No one was nearby. Good. He lifted himself up, ignoring the small bit of pain in his body as he moved towards the kitchen. He grabbed some food and loaded it all onto a large plate before he walked over to his room, shutting the door behind him just in case. He didn't want anyone coming back too early without him noticing. He ignored everything in the room, instead heading towards the large cupboard in the corner before knocking on the door twice. "No one's here. You can come out now." The door opened, a green-haired girl slipping out with a large black cloak wrapped around her. "Thank you. Do you have any food?" "Here." Ichigo handed the plate over to her and she wasted no time scarfing down all the food on the plate. He hadn't expected to have found her here. She could have been their version of the Edela's copy, but she had stopped that line of thought last night when he asked her a few questions. This was the same person he had encountered in Edela's. Nozomi, Knight of the King. He hadn't understood why she was there at first. All he had known was that Kisuk had hidden her for him to find, which meant she must have come through the portal before they did. Kisuk had been kind enough to leave one of his cloaks behind for her, shielding her magical power from everyone nearby. It was the only reason no one knew she was here so far, and he wanted to keep it that way for now. She had woken up part way through the night and had tried to leave in that moment too. It wasn't like he hadn't been prepared for that, however, purposely pretending to be asleep to see how she would act. She had almost attacked him till she had looked at his face, all resistance disappearing as she had dropped into a bow. That had confused him at first because he assumed that she had seen him as his brother. But she instead had chosen to call him Prince, realizing that he was Kyan. And that small shown of respect seemed to be because she already knew what had happened. The war had been lost and she was now in Earthland. She hadn't bothered hiding any information on why. It seemed she had fused with the Earthland version of herself, who she called her brother, and as such had gained a container within her body to store magic. Because of that, the anima had seen her as one of them and had pulled her to their world with them. He couldn't find it in him to just throw her to the wolves. She had been one of his brother's friends, and she had only been fighting for what she had seen was right. They no longer had a reason to fight any longer, as Edelas could no longer be accessed, making them more like acquaintances than enemies. "Is everyone gone?" asked Nozomi, halfway through a piece of chicken. "Yeah. Most are at the guild and I've bought myself a bit of extra time before I need to head out." "I see. Do any of them know about me yet?" "No, and it's best to keep it that way for now." Nozomi tilted her head in confusion. "Why? Why? Don't forget that you the enemy to some of them. It has taken people here a while to get used to Mist-Ogden. I just want to give them a bit of warning before I introduce another of their enemies to them, and I still don't know what you want to do here. You can stay here and get your bearings, or you can choose something else to do." "I'll stay here for a while if you don't mind, Prince." "You can stop calling me that, you know. My king constantly acknowledged you as his brother, and that makes you the prince." Nozomi slowly placed the plate down. "My king. Was he happy in the end?" Ichigo glanced at her in suspicion. "What makes you think he died?" "Because that's what he would have done if he failed. He wanted a world of magic more than any of us." Ichigo sighed. "Yeah, he was happy, I'd say. It wasn't what he wanted, but he did get to live and die in a world of magic." Nozomi smiled. "I'm glad. Thank you. What about you? Your injuries okay? You said you fought Mist-Ogden, or at least the old Mist-Ogden." "I've applied some rudimentary first aid. I wasn't badly hurt, merely stunned and knocked out. I borrowed some of the bandages in the drawers. I hope you don't mind." "Go ahead." Ichigo sat down on his bed, leaning against the wall. "What about your magic? Can you still use it?" "I have yet to try it yet. I was unsure on how to properly wield it, considering the amount of power I can now access, along with all the energy in the air too." Nozomi smiled as she breathed in, feeling the energy around her. "It truly is incredible, this world. My king once told me of his times here. He said it was glorious." "He told you stories, did he? You might be able to help me here then. Did he ever mention something called the Holy Palace?" "The Holy Palace?" Nozomi shook her head. "I'm afraid not. He may have mentioned it in passing, but I'm not sure, as he never mentioned that name. He said it was something here in Earthland. Said he had gone there, and then he understood things." "I see." Nozomi closed her eyes in thought, fiddling with her hands in the progress. "Shuakura. He did once say he couldn't access certain memories of the kings. We normally told him off, so he never got much of a chance to expand on it, but I do remember him personally asking questions about the king's time in Earthland. It is likely something may have happened in relation to this holy palace that blocked Shuakura's access to those memories. That's something at least. I need to do some research on the place. I can help you if you wish, my prince." I am a scientist, so I may be able to see some things from a new perspective you can't. That'll be great. Ichigo grabbed the plate as he headed for the door. Stay hidden if anyone comes, else you have free reign around her. Be careful if you try and borrow one of Levy's books. She always seems to notice. And keep the cloak on. It'll hide your magical signature from everyone else. With that, Ichigo left, Nozomi thinking about what to do. In the end she settled for something simple. She went to get more food. Protector of the Fairies. Gildarts smiled as he threw Natsu across the room. The sneak attack the Dragon Slayer had tried failing miserable. He turned back to Urza to properly focus on her question. What was that again? Something about your arm. About your arm, not mine. How do you move it so easily? Gildarts glanced at his wooden arm, giving it a little flex. It's a fairly advanced one. I had to pull a few favors to get it as it's still in development mostly. I would have gotten two if I had known. Gildarts trailed off as he glanced at her wooden arm. It's fine, said Urza, using a bit of telekinesis to move her arm as she reached for the fork holding a piece of her strawberry cake. She slowly lifted it up to her mouth and was about to take a bite of the cake when the fork fell from her grip. She sighed, reaching for the fork with her normal hand and placing it back on the counter. I still need a bit of work here with the more precise movements. It's impressive. Poor Lyusica got it for you right. She did. It's nothing fancy and is normally only for aesthetics, but she advised me to use my telekinesis to make it move. Still, even that is impressive. I don't know if I could do something like that. I'd just as likely break the arm with my crash magic than make it move. Urza laughed. She enjoyed this, being able to laugh about the disability. She couldn't do this with many people, but it worked with Gildarts since he was going through the same thing that she was. So how does your work? Want to see? Gildarts brought his arm onto the table and rolled up the sleeve to his shoulder, revealing the port where the wood connected to the flesh. It's a very hard process, but it basically involves linking part of my nervous system and the pathways that magic follow in our bodies and to make sure they do reach the arm. We essentially trick it into believing the arm is still there, and then I just move it or use my magic. It's that simple. Well. Gildarts scratched the back of his head sheepishly. It's a painful process. And I mean really painful. Agonizing even. I remember screaming. A lot. You can't even pass out because it's too painful, and it helps that you're awake as it means they are connecting the nerves properly. I can handle pain. Well, then there is the other problem. As I said, it's mostly in development. I'm a bit of a test user here, plus the girl making it owes me from the times I've helped her out. It helps she's one of the few women I haven't hit on too. Do you seriously hit on enough women for that to actually be a problem? What do you think? Urza sighed, taking a bit from her strawberry cake with her normal hand. Continue. Anyway, it fails with most people. I'm one of the few it has worked with so far. The procedure is still being perfected. She was reluctant to perform it on me, but she took the risk under my instinct. I needed to get back to the guild and I was willing to risk it. Gildarts sighed. Give it a few years and I'm sure it'll be on the market. I bet she'll even have stronger prosthetics at that point. The wood stuff is till she can get the limbs working properly. It looks like it works fine for you. Gildarts laughed. I'm not surprised you can't tell. The truth is that there is a slight delay in movement. My leg movements aren't too bad, I've learned to accommodate for that, but I'm about half a second behind with my left arm. It's okay in situations like this, but I'm worried if I ever need to fight. So that's why you haven't even looked at the mission board yet, even for a quick job. Yep. I'll take one once I'm sure I have the hang of this arm. Until then, I just have to wait. I can take it easy for a while, something I think I deserve after that 100-year quest. Urza glanced around, making sure Natsu was far away before she leaned it. What? What was it like? Gildarts raised an eyebrow at the barely concealed excitement in Urza's voice. Curious. Urza nodded rapidly. Can't blame you. I'm the first to ever come back alive from it. Gildarts closed his eyes, letting the memories flow back to him. How should I put this? Incredible, unbelievable, and hell. Hell. What is in the quest? No one knows. No one but I at least. At times I saw incredible things, places in the world that flourished despite the dangers around them. At others I saw things that couldn't be possible. For instance, I once entered an area where no magic worked at all. It was a complete void. And another time, I saw something. For a second at least, and then it was gone. I'm not sure what it was, but it was impossible, that much I knew. Gildarts sighed. Those were the great things there. Hell was in the form of the dangers present. My magic can crush almost anything with a few blows at most, and yet here I encountered beasts would could shrug it off and take the number up to 10, and these were fairly average beasts. Physically they aren't strong, but their skin and armor are heavily dense. What were they? I don't know. They were a lot like normal creatures that we see all over Fiori, just enhanced. They were strongest near that thing I saw for a second. I avoided that area a lot. And another example of the hell parts was this city I went to. I spent 10 weeks there, stuck in a localized time loop as I tried to save the town again and again. In the end I still couldn't, and I left instead. Urza frowned. Was it so bad there? I saw the same people die again and again despite every attempt I tried, and I still could not find where the source of the time loop was. It didn't matter if I saved them if it just re-looped, so I left. There was nothing more I could do there. Gildarts smiled a bit. I enjoyed the typically hell afterwards. A wasteland full of undead monsters, fighting for days on end until I finally broke out and escaped. It was simpler. Only you would find a brawl simpler, stated Makarov, jumping up onto the bar beside them. He glanced at Urza before shuffling his foot awkwardly. Urza, I've been thinking about the 100-year quest. You won't mind if I don't give it to you? Urza frowned before she realized what her excitement had been interpreted as, causing her to blush and bow her head. Of course not, master. It was my mistake here that made you think I was interested. I was merely curious on what was there since no one apart from Gildarts knows. That's a relief, said Makarov, wiping a bead of sweat off his brow. I've decided to shelve it for a while. No point sending someone on it for the sake of sending someone. Oh, could you ask if Myra Jane is willing to help out with the upcoming trials? I would appreciate her help on them. Certainly. Urza quickly got up, leaving Makarov and Gildarts together at the bar. Makarov jumped to the other side of the bar and poured himself a drink, sitting back down on the bar's top next to Gildarts. So who you got in mind this year? I've got 8 candidates planned. Oh. That's a lot. It sounds like it'll be busy. You have no idea. I'll probably have to promote a few this time instead of sticking to one. We don't have Laxus right now, and the original Mistogan is gone now too. Considering the size of the guild, I think we need a few more. We only have 3 currently, and Myra isn't very activate too, so normal situations take that number down to 2. Take it down to 1, added Gildarts. I'm barely here. 1 then. We need more people, hence the bigger pool this time. Well then, let's hear it. Makarov paused, glancing at Gildarts who has a suspicious look on his face. You're just waiting to say it, aren't you? Gildarts' grin grew. Say what? You know what? Do I? Makarov sighed. Fine then, candidate number 1, Ichigo. Gildarts chuckled before bursting into full-out laughter. There it is. I was waiting for that. Yeah, I was wrong. I told you. I told you 3 years ago. Can't we just skip the trials though for him? He's already a wizard saint. There's still protocol here. You may not want to follow it, but I do. Besides, I'm sure he'll do fine. Alright then, who else? Natsu. Good choice. Gildarts scratched his head and threw. This is his first time participating, isn't it? Yes. He's got a decent chance, I'd say, but we'll see how he does. Third is Gray. Another first-timer. You got a few others. Plenty. Believe it or not, this is the first time so many of them are finally ready, and of course they are all very strong mages. We have Elfman going fourth along with Levi as fifth. Good choices there, admitted Gildarts, glancing around to find Elfman. He saw him in the corner with Myra and Lysina, the group chatting and just being happy in each other's company. Elfman may not be as strong as the others, but his will is tough, and he knows terrible failure. He's got a good head on his shoulders in my opinion. And Levy. Of course she has a good head on her shoulders. On a team of Laxus and Ichigo, who do you think would have been their brains? She's a smart one, especially considering she could keep up with them to a degree back then. Well then, what do you think of these choices next? Fried and Gajeel. Fried? I don't remember him much. Who is he? The green-haired one. Gildarts followed Makarov's hand, spotting the man at one of the tables with Kana and a white-haired boy. Taushiro, if he remembered what Ichigo said correctly. He was Laxus's student. Ah. Gildarts glanced at Makarov in fake concern. You're not afraid he'll end up doing what Laxus did? I learned my lesson all right, protested Makarov, crossing his arms angrily. Besides, Fried is more than ready. I would have put him in last year, but he wasn't available when I was making choices. As for Gajeel, he did well in Edalis. He helped hold everyone together and put aside any issues he may have had with Natsu for the sake of saving everyone else. He also didn't have to go, and yet he chose to. Gildarts glanced at the Dragon Slayer, the man laughing with Panther Lily as they sat by Happy, Carla and Natsu. He does seem to get on fairly well, though I think he's bragging there about Panther Lily being more awesome than Happy. Even the guild has come to like him. He harmed us before terribly, but I can't hold on to that now seeing how he has turned out. He is truly a member of Fairy Tail now. Good for him. So, who's the last one? Kana. Gildarts sighed, placing his cup down on the bar. You were telling me about her earlier. This is her fourth attempt, right? Yes. I'm sure you've noticed her change in attitude recently. While everyone else rushes out for jobs, she's caught between a mix of worry and anticipation. She seems more confident than she ever has before, but the fear is still there. She was the first of our new generation to join, and yet she has yet to earn the rank. I know she feels pressured, and I was tempted to not enter her this time to give her a break. Why didn't you? Makarov sighed. I think it would have crushed her. She's been working so hard recently. Not in jobs, but in training. She is desperate to earn the rank, for what reason I don't know. I can't help but want to root for her this time, so I'll keep her in. It's all I can do without getting involved, and I need to remain impartial to make a fair decision. If you're sure. Well, it seems packed. Does anyone know your decision yet? Nope. I'll let hers know later on, and Myra too when I get her answer. I should announce my decision in a few days, which gives them a week to prepare before we all head off. So where are we all going? Makarov smiled knowingly. Somewhere very special. Protector of the Fairies. Are we sure this is wise? Asked Fried, he and Kana sneakily crouching in the bushes. Of course it is. Levy gave us a few hints, remember? She even said how they annoying had some empty rooms and that was so much of a hassle. Fried glanced around, looking for anyone else nearby. After Levy's little hint earlier, the two of them had snuck out to the house where so many people from Fairy Tail seemed to be residing right now. They had waited till Levy had at least left the guild first though, Wendy and Taushiro with her as they headed into the town to see the markets being set up. From what they had managed to overheard, Ichigo would be joining them there, if Mistogen's message had been any indication. They had even seen him as they were getting to the edge of the town, so they knew he and the others would likely be a while. They weren't sure about Shinji, but, from what they knew of him from Taushiro, he'd likely just ignore them and find it humorous to watch. That only left Mistogen, but he had gone in a completely different direction, heading to where poor Lyusica was if they remembered correctly. They had maybe an hour max, but probably much less, so they would have to be quick. Slowly approaching the house, they went to the door and found where Levy had complained about two random keys being. Since the keys were there, it had to mean she had given them her permission to basically break in. They slowly forced the door open, sneaking in. A floorboard creaked slightly as they entered, but they didn't have anything to worry about. No one was here after all. Moving forward, they arrived at what had to be the living area, all other rooms either branching off from there or branching off from the corridors to the sides of the living room. A kitchen was placed to one side, a large table and surface top blocking off part of the kitchen from view. So which room is which? Asked Fried, glancing round. That one's Levy's, stated Kana, pointing to one of the rooms off the living area. It's one of the originals built and she showed it to me a few times when I trained here with her. If you looked inside then it becomes even more obvious. There are hundreds of books in there. So those two should be Laxus's and Ichigo's? Asked Fried, gesturing towards the other two rooms branching off from the living room. Yep. Kana stared at the two before pointing at the one next to Levy's. That's Laxus's, while the other belongs to Ichigo. Nice place. Fried walked over to the large table, counting the seats. There were 11 total. I think they really were expecting us to force our way in sooner rather than later. The occupants here at the moment only number 6, ignoring Laxus right now, leaving 1 chair for you and 3 for me, Bixlow, and Evergreen. Enough about that, called Kana, walking down one of the corridors. Let's find the 2 empty rooms. I assume that you and the others in the Thunder God tribe will all be sharing. Yes. Bixlow and Evergreen aren't as interesting in getting a spot here but wouldn't mind coming round a bit once Laxus returns. I'll be making sure to leave space for them for when that happens. Good. Kana continued onwards, Fried preparing to follow when he heard something. He turned back to the kitchen, slowly walking forward and resting his hands against the surface separating it from the living room. Did he imagine it? He couldn't sense anything nearby, so maybe it had been his imagination. Still, he could check. Fried? Come on already. It was probably nothing. They were alone right now after all. Fried retreated from the kitchen and followed Kana down the corridor. They reached the end where Kana pulled open the 2 doors, clapping her hands in delight. Ah, I told you so. The empty rooms. Fried glanced inside both before walking into the bigger one. His mind quickly ran through measurements in his head, planning out where his stuff could go and where to put the spare beds for Evergreen and Bixlow. Kana did similar but stopped when she spotted a small note on the ground. She picked it up, flipping it open before scanning the contents. She froze when she realized what it said, a depressing aura seeming to appear around her. What is it? Asked Fried, noticing her state. She silently handed him the letter, at which Fried nodded after reading the contents. Well, at least we have permission to take the rooms. She's sentenced me to a triple sparring session when I next ask to practice with her. Using only card magic. I'm going to die. Fried patted her on the back. It will be fine. Easy for you to say. Laxus isn't here to punish you. She shut her mouth when she realized what she had said, guilt in her eyes. I'm sorry, I didn't mean dash. No, it's okay. Fried glanced down the corridor, smiling at all the chairs. Laxus will be back. I'm not the only one to believe so. Count the chairs, remember. They never took away his spot, meaning Ichigo and Levy believe he'll be back soon enough too. I suppose so. The two closed the doors before heading back to the living room to leave through. Fried paused as they entered the room, his eyes spotting something different as he reached for his sword. Kana. Yes. Ichigo's room. It's that one over there, right? Yeah. Why? Wasn't it closed before? Kana glanced at the door in worry, her fists clenching. Fried was right. It had been closed before, but now the door was ajar. Someone was here with them. I thought I heard something earlier. I passed it off as my imagination, but it can't be now. Someone is here with us. Kana sensed out around them. It wasn't Ichigo, he was easy to detect with all the magic he had. Laxus, if he was actually here, was the same, but it was unlikely to be him. Mistogen had high levels too, but it wasn't him. Shinji and Taoshiro were also the same, but it wasn't them. That left Levy and Wendy, the ones with the smaller amounts of magical power. It didn't suit them though. If they were here, then they would have revealed themselves by now. Wendy, for instance, wouldn't want to prank them, and, while Levy wouldn't be against it, she would have done it while they were in the other rooms. Slowly heading into Ichigo's room, they glanced around carefully. The window was shut from the inside, so no one had left that way. It meant someone might have been in there or would have left by now. A crunching noise sounded suddenly, the two turning to the closet. They glanced at one another, Fried pulling his sword from its sheath while Kana reached for the closet. They swiftly pulled it open to see a green-haired girl inside, a slice of bread hanging from her mouth. Slowly removing the bread, Nozomi placed it on the plate before giving the two a nod of acknowledgement. "Ah, hello. Are you friends of the prince?" Fried and Kana glanced at one another before their suspicious glares turned into smirks. My, said Kana scandalously. I didn't know Ichigo was into this kind of stuff. She slowly shut the closet's door. Don't mind us. We keep this a secret. With that the two left, Nozomi frowning inside the closet. She hadn't liked those looks. She had the feeling that her presence had been completely misinterpreted. Oh well. She reopened the closet's door and jumped back out, carrying her plate back to the other room to finish her meal properly. She walked past the man dressed like a butler, barely noticing him until he coughed lightly. The action caused her to almost drop her plate, turning in shock. She really was failing at the staying hidden part of her orders. Can I ask what you are doing here? I have permission. Indeed. Mistogen slowly crossed his arms. From who? My prince. The suspicious look on Mistogen's face vanished and he smiled brightly, looking as if he had found a kindred spirit. Ah, you must be from Edalis. It is a pleasure to meet anyone fellow servant of our master. He's not my master, protested Nozomi. Oh really? Why are you calling him prince then? The king referred to him as his brother. Doesn't mean you have to listen to him. Nozomi glanced to the side awkwardly. I also don't know what to do here. Mistogen nodded at her. See, we are kindred spirits. I do not know what to do either, but Ichigo was kind enough to help me out. I trust you mean no harm to him. He is no longer an enemy. Good. Mistogen grabbed her by the arm before dragging her to the entrance of the house. You might as well help out then. I need to get some stuff from town and you can help bring it back. But it won't take too long. Think of it as paying for all the food you are eating. Nozomi relented, following after the strange man. People kept misinterpreting her presence today. I'm Nozomi. Nice to meet you. I'm Mistogen. Protector of the fairies. Mysteries and plans. So what do you think? I don't know, complained Ichigo, his eyes glancing towards Toshiro and Wendy at a nearby stall. I thought you would have gone through this kind of stuff by now. Levi pouted. But look at it. It's cute. It's a pointed hat. Correction. A pointed hat with a slight tilt. I don't even seen the tilt. It's there, trust me. Ichigo shook his head. Do you want it or not? It's your choice. I need a second opinion after all. And if you, the guy who never deviates from the same stuff, likes it, then it means it must be good. Ichigo grabbed the hat before shoving it down on her head and watched it sink down to her eyes. It's also too big. Levi crossed her arms, part of her face still hidden by the hat, but he could tell she was glaring at him. I'm getting it. Then what did you need my opinion for? Ichigo sighed as she walked over to the stall owner to buy the hat, heading over to Wendy and Toshiro. I thought she would have gone through stuff like this. She did, said Toshiro. Said there wasn't anything good before. It seems she changed her mind. She did mention something about saving for books, said Wendy helpfully, her actions only causing Ichigo to sigh as he pulled out a wallet to check the money he had on him. What are you doing? What do you think? She's going to go crazy like always when she reaches the books, and I'll be the one who will end up buying the ones she can't afford. I still don't know where she stores this stuff. There's probably hundreds hidden under the floorboards by now. Can't you dash? Wendy was cut off as a hat was shoved onto her head. She pushed it up a bit to see Levi giving her a beaming smile, stars in her eyes. It's perfect. I knew it would fit. You bought two. Ichigo glanced between the two, seeing the identical hats they were both wearing. Why? Because my cute little apprentice needs something similar to me. I mean, look at Toshiro. He copies you after all. I don't, protested Toshiro, looking away when Levi directed a knowing glance at him. He quickly distracted himself by glancing at the stores, finding a nice green scarf that he liked. "I'll be right back." Ichigo nodded, watching the two girls as they were drawn over to something of interest at another of the stalls. He was glad Levi hadn't asked anything about why he had been late. He wasn't interested in explaining much about his illness right now, especially after all the effort he was going through to disguise it from most people as best as he could. Only Wendy and Miss Doggin really should have had some idea of its severity, the others being a mix on how to react to it. Those 2 weeks that had passed had pushed the date just into winter, hence why people were already selling stuff at these stalls. There wasn't as much as they might have been, but some of the big groups had yet to arrive, Magnolia's disappearance cancelling most of the stalls. It was lucky that some of them had turned up, else there wouldn't be any stalls to visit. A speck of white hit his shoulder, Ichigo glancing upwards as it started to snow. It was going to take a while to get used to the time in Earthland. He was technically a year and a half out of sync with it, so it should have been summer around about now. Seeing the snow was refreshing somehow though. It was just nice to look at. Being a year and a half out of sync also had caused a bit of a ruckus at Fairy Tail when they had heard from Natsu. He was now being roped into going to the guild at the end of the week for a surprise party, though the surprise aspect was kind of ruined by the fact he kept walking in when they were half working on it. A third of the guild knew that he knew and yet believed only they were the ones he had walked in on. It was funny to watch. It was also nice that they were going through all the effort. Most of his celebrations were done back home with Laxus and Levi, and he hadn't really bothered much when he had been with Shinji and Taushiro, as it normally passed without him even realizing. It reminded him of his mother somewhat when she went through the big act of acting like everything was ordinary before springing the surprise when he least had expected it. The downside was being dragged to these stalls as he hadn't originally wanted to come. Levi had insisted because she wanted to get him a decent present, especially after hearing he hadn't bothered to celebrate his birthday in so long. He'd have to make sure to do the same on her birthday to pay her back. It wasn't completely true that he hadn't celebrated his birthday, but only Listener would have a rough idea of that since she had been a cellmate. She had been present when his brother had come crashing in and all but dragged him to a party for the both of them. It was one of the few times where he hadn't once thought about his brother being an enemy. A finger poked against him, forcing him to turn towards whoever wanted his attention. It was Levi, a small bag hidden behind her back. "You okay?" "Sure, why?" "You look like you're thinking about something." "I bet it's because you're older than you should be now. Or maybe it's because we missed your birthday." "Don't worry about it. It was fine, and at least my brother dash." "Your brother? Damn. He hadn't meant to let that slip." "It's nothing." "Who's your brother?" Levi leaned in and pouted, attempting to look as cute as she could in an attempt to crush his defenses. "Come on, tell me. Please." Ichigo sighed, relenting. "My Edala's self. He had a strange way of viewing the two of us. Said we were brothers. In fairness, Nozomi did the same with her Earthland self." "Nozomi?" Levi glared. "What were you up to in that year and a half?" "Not what you're thinking. You're reading too many of those books Urza borrows from you. Don't try and deny it." Urza let it slip when she asked if you could lend her a few others in exchange for the ones she already borrowed. "I never turn down a good book," stated Levi proudly. "No matter what it contains, I shall read it with pride. Just don't lend them to Wendy." "I would never, or at least not till she's a lot older," Levi muttered, the last part whispered to herself. "So what was the version of you like there?" "The others said he was the king and Listener said he was really arrogant and rude, but what was he like to you?" "Mostly the same, but a lot more friendly." Ichigo held up his left hand, showing the two pendants around his wrist. "One of these is his, the other is the gift he gave me on his birthday. He was a nice guy, just we were on opposite sides. Still, he was kind enough to me. Not enough to free me, but enough to make sure I was comfortable and things. Kept Listener down there so I could have someone to talk to, let me out on occasions to stretch my legs. Even the cell I was in also served as an attempt to teach me, though it also stopped me from escaping for 6 months too. In the end I started calling him brother because he grew on me. He always called me it, so I just responded in kind." "He sounds much better than Natsu said," stated Levi with a nod. Wendy said magic seemed to adore him. It tricked her into believing he was you to start with. His presence was just so strong to her. Not surprising. He was meant to be a Quincy of sorts, the opposing power to people like me and Toshiro. We're Shinigami, but he was a Quincy. It didn't matter if he couldn't store magic, he could gather it from around him instead. That ability sounds incredible. Ichigo looked at her, causing her to frown. What? It does. Your description makes it sound like magic was like an extension of himself, unlike us who have it as a source of energy to draw upon. I guess it does. Quincy do have very high potential after all. It can just take longer sometimes for them. Have you ever met one? Apart from your brother? Ichigo shook his head. Not apart from my mother, and I never saw her fight at all. Well, with all the Shinigami around Fairy Tail, maybe a Quincy will show up after a while and challenge you all. Levi laughed at the idea. I'm picturing black hair and glasses. Yeah, are you done at the stalls yet anyway? Almost. Let's just wait for Wendy and Toshiro to be done. Ichigo glanced over at Toshiro, seeing him fiddling with a green scarf and trying it on. Toshiro did like green, so it suited him. Wendy meanwhile was testing some ribbons in her hair, seeing if she believed them to look cute or not. Ichigo glanced back at Levi, noticing the new ribbon holding back her hair. Do girls really like those ribbons? Some, answered Levi, glancing at him as he looked towards the stall. An idea shot through her head and she was already blurting it out before she could stop herself. Especially girls around Wendy's age. Ichigo flinched, but he didn't seem to get annoyed at the suggestion. It's getting close to Christmas. People like receiving gifts then. Maybe you should get a pair. Ichigo glanced at her uncertainly. Would they even care after so long? I'm probably dead to them. Levi walked behind him before pushing him towards the stall. Of course they would. Go on, I'm sure they would love a present from their big brother. Just because you refuse to see them, doesn't mean you can't give them a gift or two. Ichigo nodded and Levi smiled when she stopped, and Ichigo kept moving towards the stall without her assistance. I'll take that into consideration. Levi nodded before leaving him to it, allowing him to take as much time as he needed there. She gave him the push he needed, and that was all that mattered to her here. Now she just had to wait and hope for him. And maybe buy a few books while she was there. There had to be some new ones she didn't own yet. Protector of the Fairies. So what are we after? Asked Nozomi, reluctantly following after Mistogin. She noticed the looks people seemed to give him, but the man seemed to ignore them, radiating confidence as he walked. Mistogin glanced over his shoulder, shrugging. Food mostly. Ichigo got the last set before the whole Edalas event happened, and I happened to tag along at the time while disguised. I remember roughly what each person wanted, so it is simpler for me to go instead of waiting and compiling a list. If we forgot something, then it isn't much of a big deal. I see. Nozomi watched the shopkeeper as they entered the store, noticing the glare aimed at Mistogin, and by extension her. Why are they acting so hostile? Mistogin followed her gaze, lowering his voice when he spoke. Ah, that's because the old me did some bad stuff. And you got away with it? It must be bad if they are looking at you like this. How would you say they look at me? Nozomi glanced at the people around them, his eyes catching their hidden attempts at glancing at them. Fear crossed their faces at points, disgust appearing at other moments. It wasn't like the expressions she remembered being aimed at her when she was younger. Those were more of misguided understanding with a touch of terror and anger. Unreasonable hatred too. The ones directed at Mistogin was purposeful though. The looks were truly meant, and so was the hate. There was just solid conviction in how they seemed to treat him. What did you do? It's not important anymore. That was the old me. I did some bad stuff, but things happened and I lost everything. No memories of anything. I was just empty. I would have been arrested anyway though. Maybe even executed if they wanted to make an example out of me. Ichigo gave me a second chance, which was when I ended up here. Glancing around, Mistogin shrugged. This is the first time I've gone out without the mask. They still view me as Jalal, the old me. But I no longer feel the need to hide myself now that I have a proper identity. I am Miss Doggin and I won't be afraid of how they act towards me because of the man I once was. Nozomi nodded, grabbing an apple from the shelf before raising it towards her mouth. Miss Doggin grabbed it before she could take a bit out of it, glaring at her. No eating the food till it's paid for. It's bad manners, and technically stealing since you have yet to own the food. But I'm hungry. Miss Doggin glanced at her suspiciously before leaning closer to her and whispering to make sure no one could hear what he said. You're new to magic, aren't you? Nozomi nodded. I only recently gained the ability, and my first fight with it resulted in my being exhausted afterwards. No wonder. Miss Doggin sighed, grabbing some extra food from shelves. I talked to the master about it. I wanted to know what magic was since I didn't remember. He stated it was the energy of the world, but it is also a source of energy to us. Everyone has a spark of magic in them in this world. It is just that a limited number possess the capabilities to be mages. For a mage, in particular a new mage, they aren't used to the feeling of being drained. We can live without magic in our bodies, but we do get hungry or weak if it was to all be drained from us or we exhausted it. So you're saying this feeling will go away soon enough? Yes. Ah, said Nozomi, returning the conversation to normal volumes. That's good. It's a pain being this hungry. I'm eating way too much recently. I wondered what the issue was, but it seems it was just a natural reaction anyone would get from these unfamiliar circumstances. A gasp sounded behind her, causing Nozomi to turn at the same time Miss Doggin did. They saw Kana's head pop back behind a shelf before hearing the sound of someone running away. Nozomi looked at Miss Doggin before glancing at the way Kana had run. I think she inferred something she shouldn't have. What makes you think that? She had the same strange look on her face that she had earlier. Just ignore it. I'm sure nothing bad will happen because of this. If you're sure. After waiting a few moments for Miss Doggin to grab everything he was after, she took the money from him and went and bought the food, ignoring his protests. There was no guarantee they would sell him the stuff with his old past, even if he was someone new now. She however had done nothing to earn their hatred, so they had no reason to deny her service. Thanks, muttered Miss Doggin as they left, carrying the food in a bag with one arm. That made things easier. No problem. Nozomi halted mid-step, tilting her head. I sense the prince. Cool. What's the problem? How can I? Miss Doggin glanced at her. Another new thing you'll need to learn. Those with magic grow sensitive to locating others that have it. Ichigo. Well, he's a prime example to start off with because he's so easy to locate. It may help that you are already familiar with him on some level from knowing the Edela's version of him. Maybe. It feels like he's right behind us. That's because he is. Miss Doggin raised a hand, waving at Ichigo. He saw Ichigo's eyes slowly widen before he rushed forward to them, shoving them into an alleyway just as a voice called out to him. Ichigo? Where you going? I'll catch up Levi. One moment. Ichigo waited till Levi and the others were out of sight before glaring at Nozomi. What are you doing out here? Buying food. There was stuff back home. Ichigo shook his head, glancing from side to side in case anyone was nearby. He failed to look up and notice the speck of green hair belonging to their watcher from a rooftop. At least you got that cloak, else the others would have detected you and caused way too many problems for us. I don't really want them to find out about you just yet. I'm sorry I caused problems for you, my prince. It is my fault, sir. I asked her for my assistance. I did not realize you had been hiding her from view. Ichigo sighed. It's okay, you won't have a problem with her anyway. Just keep her secret from the guild. It'll be hard to explain this to them with everything that's happened. I'll sort it out, don't worry. It's fine, said Miss Doggin, his eyes noticing someone leaving above them. He recognized the person as Freed, so it wasn't a problem. The man had met Nozomi by accident before, and, if he was listening, he had to understand the reasoning for silence. If he had seen the shocked look of realization on Freed's face, he would have known that the man had gotten it completely wrong. Protector of the Fairies. Jura slowly bowed to the man in front of him, thanking him for his assistance. Following the directions led him down a small dirt path, barely any signs that it was regularly used. Is this really the place? He muttered, glancing around. He was almost at the outskirts of the small village and it looked completely different than he remembered. He knew it had been a few years but things couldn't have changed so much, could they? For starters, the town seemed emptier than before. He had some theories on that but no one seemed willing to answer his questions. The trace of magic in the air was enough to answer him though. Even if it was faint, the place almost reeked of hollow magic. Why that was, he did not know. The town was in the middle of nowhere but attacks like this would have resulted in either people hearing about it or that the hollow was so strong that no one was left. If nothing had been heard in all that time, it was a good chance that there was some reason to not alert anyone of what was happening. He would have no choice but to consult the matter with the Magic Council and the other wizard saints. If he was lucky, then it was just some foolish people who had stumbled on the method of becoming a hollow and the town was trying to cover the matter up. If he wasn't, then the town was willingly hiding the existence of the hollows. Even now he could feel like he was being watched. They weren't hiding their presence very well but they kept a respectful distance, wary of his power. He needed to complete his business sooner rather than later. As he turned the final bend and the house came into view, he realized there was already a complication. The house in front of him was destroyed, the roof caved in. It didn't stop him from rushing over. Unlike the faint energy in the town, this energy was new. That meant it had been recent. Was he too late? Was this done because he was here? It was possible. The man who he had asked directions from had talked a lot more than necessary, a bit of hesitation and nervousness showing in his voice. It must have been to keep him away as long as he could. Using his earth magic, he gently lifted the fallen beams and debris. Hello? If you can hear me, say something. He didn't give up with no response. Each beam moved revealed more and more of the house until he finally found a limb. He wasted no time anywhere else, quickly shifting the remaining debris to get the old man out. This was the man. While the house was a new one, the man was the same as he remembered. He doubted anyone else was there but he had to be sure, quickly sorting through the rest of the house before turning his full attention to the old man when he found no one. It wasn't good. Cuts and bruises covered the man's body, faint burns along his face. This wasn't the result of the house collapsing on it. That was merely to try and throw everyone else off the scent. He knew this man, and a collapsing roof wouldn't have been the thing to harm him to this degree. He lowered a hand down to the man's neck before he sighed sadly. He could feel nothing. He was too late. Laying the old man down, he closed the man's eyes before shifting the earth around him with his magic. The man deserved a proper burial instead of being left like this. He slowly lowered the man into the newly made grave before sealing him in, taking a plank of wood roughly the right size and using it as a makeshift tombstone. The engraving wasn't as good as he would have liked but it was enough. The man's name and the dates he lived from, guessed as best as he could. It would have to suffice any visitors, if the man knew anyone still alive. He was a very old man by this point. Who did this to you? Muttered Jura, glancing around at his little watchers in the distance. Was it possible they knew why he had come looking for the man rather than it just being coincidental? If so, then there was a problem. There were very few sky magic users in existence in the first place, and this man had been one of the most powerful. A sky god slayer. He had first encountered the man years ago. It was when he was younger, a time not long after he had met Team Fairy. It had been a brief encounter, only by chance. He had passed through the same town he was in now and had stopped upon hearing the man's strange words. The town had mostly been ignoring him. He had wanted to do the same but the man had latched onto him the moment he showed the slightest bit of attention and retold everything. The urgency of the man's voice, along with his reluctance to say anything harsh to the man to leave, made him listen, but he had still passed it off as nothing back then. But now he had met Ichigo again and Wendy had seen a similar thing to what the man had. Magic being alive and showing emotion. The man back then had claimed to have been a sky god slayer, again something he wasn't sure if he had believed or not back then. He had, though the words god slayer had been used to add more truth to the man's argument and to get him to believe the old man. The description matched a lot of what Wendy had told him recently, which was partly why he had tried to seek out this man today. That wasn't the only part of it though. The man's description had gone on to describe the magic around someone as if it feared them and that it obeyed the person's will because it was afraid. An exact opposite of the effect that had been around Ichigo. Perhaps he was not the only one to know of the rumors. And, if that was the case, perhaps people didn't want this knowledge becoming known to others. They wanted it hidden, and so took away the only person who had any truth about it. If something had been happening in the town, then the man would have likely known too. The old man must have become a risk, but not enough to warrant elimination till he had shown up. He glanced back at the watchers once more, seeing a newcomer with them. The way they seemed to stiffen at the newcomer's presence implied a superior of sorts. He wanted to confront them right now, but he wasn't sure if it was the wisest choice. If the old man had been eliminated because of what he knew, it meant that the person the man had been afraid of could have been involved. And any man who could make magic fear him was someone to be afraid of. Rest well, Jura simply said as he gave one last look at the grave. He'd have to consult with Ichigo about this for his own personal opinion, and to also give him a warning for Wendy. This wasn't the first sky magic user's death that he had heard about. Protector of the Fairies. Grandoma patiently waited for the 2 rune knights he had requested, sparing a few glances to the door as he read through reports. Nothing new in them, but that didn't mean anything good. It just meant the situation was as annoying as before. Every day he had to sort through paper after paper of everything from financial reports to possible regulation rules to punishment requests. While he didn't agree with a lot of what Jushiro had done as chairman, he had to admire his ability to manage it all despite his illness. And the major troublemaker of long ago, Fairy Tail, was within reasonable boundaries. Not as tight as he would have liked right now, but it was a balancing game. The allegiance of the Shinigami, Ichigo, was shaky, and right now he still had plenty of use. Spinning the whole Nirvana event for their favor had solidified their support with the public, but that also meant delaying any possible outright actions. That was of course so long as they had nothing to act on. It wouldn't be easy to move against Fairy Tail though. They had a lot of allies in the world, and would strike back viciously if provoked enough. It was why he wasn't a big fan of them. They weren't people that could be controlled, and such people threatened the peace of the world. Already that had attacked Oration Cease. Who would be next? He needed intelligence if he wished to move against them. Insider information. Something that was very tricky to get. The master of the guild would let almost anyone join, but he was sure that Makarov would realize who was a fake unless suitable countermeasures were put in place to get around him. The sound of footsteps made him look up, 2 men standing in front of him. One of them wore the standard uniform given to all captains of the Rune Knights. This man was one of his favorites to use, simply due to his strict faith to the rules and to follow them through. Lahar was his name, the head captain of the custody enforcement unit. The other was dressed far more casual. He let the informal wear slide, acknowledging that the man had been summoned rapidly and was getting ready for his mission. His hair had been shaved extremely thin and it revealed the large scar on the left side of his face. This man was one of the best infiltrators at his disposal. Skilled in both memory control magic and in teleportation magic, it made him extremely successful at what he did. Lahar, the chairman said in greeting before turning to the other man. Doran Bolt. You both came in remarkable time. You requested our presence urgently, Lahar simply responded. It was best to not waste your precious time. Indeed. We better get on with this then. Grandoma looked towards Doran Bolt, seeing the man shuffling nervously with an anxious expression on his face. Is there a problem? Are you sure I'm the right man for this job? Of course. You are one of our best. If anyone can find the info we need on Fairy Tail, I believe it will be you. Surely there must be someone else, Doran Bolt begged. Please, just don't send me to that guild. Anywhere else. Grandoma frowned, leaning forward angrily. You dare question my decision? You are one of my soldiers, and I have determined that you are the best person capable for this job. And what if I run into that monster? Monster? They are just mages, like you and me. The only difference is that they may have a lot more magical power. You don't understand, sir. Doran Bolt clutched his sides. I still see that memory at night. No child could slaughter so many and come out unharmed. He's a monster in every sense of the word. And if he figures me out he won't. He knows me, sir. Maybe just faintly, but he met me once before. My magic will find it hard enough to mess with his mind, and if he discovers my purpose, then I'm afraid I will die. A monster does not show mercy. You have no choice in the matter, said Grandoma, his tone leaving no room to argue. Finish preparing for your mission and then head out. Doran Bolt shakily bowed before vanishing, Lahar capturing the chairman's attention. He may become a flight risk here. There is no one better for this task. He must simply get past this irrational fear. If he can't, then he will be useless, and then he will truly get himself killed. You would like me to be on standby nearby, correct? The chairman nodded. Yes. It is imperative that we find out what secrets Fairy Tale has hidden away. Many may not know this, but Fairy Tale is one of the oldest guilds around, spawning off smaller guilds that went to make a name for themselves as time passed. Blue Pegasus, Quattro Cerberus, and even that pesky dark guild, Raven Tail. And yet it is shrouded in mystery, no true allegiance but to themselves. Won't it be risky, moving against Fairy Tale? 3 of the wizard saints currently were either members of the guild or still are. And one of them is one of the 4 gods of Ishgar. And the loyalty the 4 show to one another could drag the other 3 into it. We could be alienating 6 wizard saints here. Sometimes, risks must be taken. Besides, they will not act out unless we do first. And if we fail to find anything, we will not act. If you are sure, Chairman, then I shall trust in your wisdom. Good. Now, you had a request of me. Yes, sir. Lahar stood up straight, hoping to make a good impression as he made his request. I would like to ask for the assistance of one of the generals in case of an emergency. Indeed? I suppose that is fair enough. If you need to move in, then you will need more than just troops to win against such powerful mages. Grandoma thought to himself for a second, debating on who to lend. I think General Cookaki will be of greatest assistance. Doesn't he know people from Fairy Tale though? His beliefs may collide with his duty. Grandoma shook his head. No, Byakuya is known to be dedicated and to follow the rules to the letter, just like you do. If he needs to fight against the people he knows, he will obey and will show no restraint. He would have taken Jalal from them, despite being on good terms with some of them, if it wasn't for Juushiro's foolish decision. An idea came to Grandoma's mind. In fact, if you find anything, move in to apprehend Jalal too. He is untouchable so long as Ichigo remains a wizard saint, but he won't be if we find something big on the guild, as his loyalty would now be lost. Take Jalal before he slips away. Lahar nodded. Very well, sir. I will inform Doran Bolt too. Good. And be careful. We must not be discovered until the trap closes around them all. Only then can the thorn that is Fairy Tale be eliminated once and for all. Protector of the Fairies. Unplanned meetings. Ichigo let out a sigh of relief as he was finally released from the stuffy room he had been stuck in for the past hour. The big downside of being a wizard saint was definitely the boring meetings, as they only ever talked in circles about facts. This time, it had all been about Edelas, and as such had required him to participate the most. The master had been asked questions too, but nowhere near as many, since he had reported that he had only known second-hand information. That had meant he had been forced to answer question after question, and the council normally wanted more elaborate details than what he went into. And that was okay most of the time, but he had to be careful with what he said. For starters, he didn't want anyone to realize his brother had been king there. The council had overacted at smaller stuff, and he didn't want them to become suspicious of him or his abilities because of how far his alternate version took his. That also led him to altering a few other events, keeping a story that Kyan was the leader of a rebellion and that he had been helped by him while he waited the year and a half. He couldn't hide the time difference. He could act the same, but people would have noticed something off, especially if they popped over to Fairy Tale and saw the party being set up. And at least the name Kyan could throw them off. Technically it was the truth because Kyan had been the leader. He just omitted the part where he had been Kyan. Ability-wise, he simply explained the people of Edelas being incapable of using magic under normal circumstances. He had been forced to expand on it, but not many issues were pressed there due to hearing how outmatched the majority of that world was compared to their own. There was little they could learn in the council's eyes from those who couldn't even use magic to their same level of efficiency. One topic the chairman had seemed most interested was in anima. He explained as much as he could, making sure not to mention the danga. Yuruaki had looked at him suspiciously though when he had gone through the explanation, and he had almost thought that she had been about to call him out on it. There was something about the woman. He had only interacted with her a few times, and yet she always seemed so strange around him. It was like a mix of wariness and suspicion. And he doubted it was a simple matter of him being fast and threatening her title. Eventually though, after so many questions, they had all been released. It had been one of the few times all the wizard saints had been gathered, though it seemed like 3 of them had been thought projections. The meeting was always so formal too. They had to wear the cloaks, and he had gotten a few strange looks for having had his mostly ruined. He had still been trying to find time to go get it fixed and had simply run out of time. At least he had cleaned it up a bit with water so it wasn't as messy as before. "I'm glad to get out of there," said Ichigo to Makarov as the small master joined him. "That took forever." "I don't blame you. The meetings I go to for other guild masters are much more fun, and we still do a lot of work at them." "That is because you are friends with all the other guild masters, Makarov." The two turned and Makarov gestured to the newcomer for Ichigo's benefit. "Ichigo, this is one of the founding members of Fairy Tail. I would like to introduce you to Warodsakin, one of the 4 gods of Ishgar." Ichigo glanced at the man, wondering if the man could even be called that. He looked more like a hybrid of a tree and a person, his hair seemingly replaced with leaves like what could be found at the top of a tree. One question was on his mind though. "God." "I," said Warod in embarrassment. "To be honest, it's a bit of an exaggeration of my abilities. I may be ranked 4th among everyone here and with the 4 gods of Ishgar, but I am far from being called a god. I guess some people choose that name because of our powerful abilities, though honestly I'm not much of a fighter. There are plenty of people with more offensive abilities than I." "You sell yourself short, Warod," said Makarov, raising a hand to shake. "It is good to see you again. And you too, Makarov. How is the guild doing after the events of Edalis?" Warod gestured towards Ichigo with his head. "I heard a lot from this young fellow, but the main point I want to hear was never asked directly." "They are all fine," Makarov answered, a smile on his face. "No one was harmed." The words brought a smile to Warod's face. "That is good to hear. I was so worried. Imagine her outrage as well if something had happened to the guild." "I suspect she would have been furious," stated Makarov with a shake of her head. "I never knew her personally, but Second told me enough." "Second?" asked Ichigo curiously. Makarov nodded as he responded. "Yes. The 2nd guild master of Fairy Tail, Master Precht. He was a great mentor back when I was young. He was the one who entrusted the guild to me before he left." "You must be curious on the other person too." "A bit," admitted Ichigo, shrugging his shoulders. "I assume she's someone important to the guild." "Of course. The 1st guild master of Fairy Tail, and the founder of it all, Mavis Vermilion." Makarov's voice dropped slightly as he looked down. "I heard she was a lovely lady, but I never had the privilege of meeting her. She was already dead by that point." "She would have liked you, Makarov," commented Warod, trying to raise the man's spirits. "After all, look at what you did with the guild. It's a great guild now, just as she would have wanted." "I guess you are right. Well then, it was nice to see you again, Warod. I wish I could stay and chat longer, but I get this strange feeling every time I leave the guild. It's like some great disaster is happening, which normally means there is when dealing with my guild." Makarov gave a glance to Ichigo. "Are you coming too, Ichigo?" Ichigo shook his head, his eyes catching Juro waiting at the side. "I've got a few things to take care of before I head back. I'll meet you back in Magnolia." "All right. Be back soon." Ichigo gave a brief wave before shaking hands with Warod. "It was nice to meet you." "You too," said Warod, his eyes slightly different now that Makarov was gone. He felt like the older man was observing him, trying to judge him on something. A word of warning. "Be careful." Ichigo frowned, looking confused. Be careful? Of what? I recognize the symptoms of a dying man. Ichigo froze, shaking his head at Warad's words. I'm not dying. I'm just a bit ill right now. And the brief coughing fit you had before the meeting. You saw that, huh? Indeed. If you don't manage to heal yourself soon enough, you likely won't live past a few weeks. What? What are you talking about? Don't worry, I'm confident you will find the cure. But a word of advice. Try not to use any magic. I'm not sure on what magic you might know beyond Shinigami magic, but best to be careful, you know. Ichigo wanted to ask more about what the man knew, but Warad was already walking off, his abrupt leaving signaling he would answer no more. Ichigo swore silently. It couldn't be that bad, could it? He had barely been back a few days and he was in a worst-case scenario situation. He would have to try and visit someone very soon. Maybe they could identify what was wrong with him. Are you okay? Asked Jura as he approached Ichigo. You look concerned. It's nothing, lied Ichigo. Anyway, what did you want? You were waiting around for me, I believe. Straight to the point, I see. Jura's eyes glanced around them suspiciously and, when he spoke, his voice was almost at a whisper. Where is Wendy? Ichigo frowned but played along. At home with the others. Is this about Nabara? Jura shook his head quickly. No. Just a warning for her. This may just be all a coincidence, but it is better to be on alert. I think people are hunting down sky magic users. Quite a lot are ending up dead recently, and one died right before I could visit him. I don't think that incident was a possible coincidence, however. Just be on guard and make sure Wendy has someone strong with her at all times. She's normally with Levi, so she should be fine, stated Ichigo. Still, I'll see if I can ask Miss Dogen to keep an extra eye on her as a precaution. Whoever is doing this, they weren't afraid to do it with you so close by. That makes them either fools or strong enough to be able to rival you. Do you think it is the work of a dark guild? I don't know. At the very least, be ready for anything. The town I visited had traces of a very particular type of magic. Hollow magic. That's not good. No, it isn't. I can see why you are cautious then. You didn't really like my hollow form back with Nirvana, and I doubt I was at the level I could have been, as something was holding me back. Be on your guard too. They may try and come after you if they think you know too much. The intelligence of the hollows in this situation is definitely high. I'll keep that in mind. And if I encounter one, aim for the mask. Shatter the mask and you win. Jura bowed his head slightly. I will keep that in mind then. Apart from this bit of bad news, it was good to see you again, Ichigo. You too, Jura. As he was about to leave, Jura stopped to ask the question that was bugging him. Miss Dogen. Not the same old one. Jelal. Ah. So that is who he is being now. Thank you for that. Giving the man a wave, he watched the older man leave before Ichigo found himself all alone. He sighed, letting some of the wariness he was feeling appear as he reached into his pockets, grabbing a couple of pills and downing them quickly. Instead of helping to ease the pain, however, it only intensified, Ichigo finding himself falling to his knees as he coughed harshly and painfully. His hand slipped into his pocket, rummaging around for more of the pills before chucking them in his mouth and doing his best to swallow them. This time they had the correct effect, easing the pain the coughing fit had caused and allowing him to stand again. It was then that he realized that he wasn't as alone as he thought he had been, a figure vanishing into the shadows behind a pillar. He hadn't seen clearly who it had been, but it had definitely been a man who had been about to rush out to his aid. He slowly walked over to the pillar, knowing the man was still hiding behind it. He could feel a bit of the man's magic now, and it was a very pleasant feeling in his opinion. It felt so similar. Slowly setting his back against the pillar, Ichigo allowed himself to slide down the back of it before he was sitting on the ground with the pillar as a support. It's been a while, Dad. Protector of the Fairies. What is there to report? Asked the Jelal of Edalas, turning to see Kyokaka walking up to him. You know I'm not your secretary. I'm just helping out for now. I know, said Jelal with a smile. And I am grateful for your help. I doubt I could do this all on my own. I'm sure you will be able to, said Kyokaku, joining Jalal to see the view of the city. Things are progressing nicely, aren't they? Yes, they are. There's still a curfew in place, but there is little resistance against it. I assume the people realize it is dangerous right now with the city being in the state that it is in. They are coping better than we anticipated, despite the lack of magic. Kyokaku gave a sad look towards Jalal. Are you sure you are okay being here? About not being with the fairy tale of Earthland. I'll be fine. I miss them, don't get me wrong, but I'll be okay in the end. Besides, there is still the Shibas here. Kyokaku smiled sadly. Not many of us left anymore. With you now as king, the rebellion is no longer needed. Our group has disintegrated and few bother calling themselves Shiba anymore. And Faust is dead too. I know that is hard for you. It is, muttered Jalal. Faust. Father. He wasn't the best man at times, but he was still a good person in his heart. And, in the end, I'm sure he chose to believe in me instead of trying to save his own life somehow. Of course he did. If he wasn't a decent person, then he would never have been a true Shiba. Speaking of which, the name for his tombstone. What would he like on it? Ganju's been working hard and is determined to do it all by himself. Says he has to in order to make up for Faust's sacrifice. Jalal was quiet for a bit. I think we should go with Faust Shiba, because that was his truest self in my opinion. The part of him that was honest and kind. Say on it that he found his way once again. I'll make sure to do that. Kyokaku gave a sigh. I still can't believe Jidanbu is gone too. He was a fun guy to drink with. I'll miss him too. I didn't know him for long, but I'm glad I could call him a friend. I bet he'd be glad too. Still, there are only 3 Shiba left in this world. That is if you still dash. I do, said Jalal, cutting Kyokaku off. I am Jalal Shiba. That will never chance. Kyokaku smiled. Good. Now, let's get away from this depressing stuff. I got the info on the remaining knights. Good. What is their status? Well, Ryrika is hanging around here in the tower. She's offered her assistance if we need it, so I can see her being somewhat useful at times. That is good, said Jalal, his mind planning out possible situations where Ryrika could be useful. She was one of the keystones of the city and will have untold amounts of knowledge, even some not relating to magic. Don Kanonji is sticking around here too. Every day, without fail, he's out there, helping with the rebuilding effort. His mere presence is helping with the morale of normal citizens and old Shiba members alike. He's a public figure, and doing what he is doing is helping to endorse your image and reduce hostility. Will he become a threat? They were loyal to the previous king after all. Kyokaku shrugged. Only time will tell, but I'm not sure they will. From what I can work out, the king was the linchpin. He held all the knights together, and without him they are separating once more. They no longer have their abilities without magic to manipulate, and hence are as powerless as we are. Then we will let them do what they want. In the end, they were only on an opposing side to us. Can any true hatred really have existed beyond the fact that we had both been forced to fight? I will take the risk that it can be overcome. I hope so too. Kyokaku glanced down into the city. We recovered the body of Shuakura Tsukishima, and what looks like the remains of Sujiro Kyuzaka. From what we know, they would never have accepted us. Both are confirmed dead, and have been for a while. I assume they both died during the final fight. Jalal frowned. The remains. Yeah. Sujiro was that massive ice dragon, it seems. He found faint parts of his clothes that had been ripped off in battle, along with remains of both his sword and of the ice that had formed him. There is always a chance we are wrong, but I confirmed with Ryrika. That was him, and he is now dead because of that. I see. And the last 2. I told you about Senna. She would have killed us on the spot if she could for our actions. Her loyalty to the king was unquestionable, bordering on possessive. It's likely he was her entire world. Well, she tried to wipe us out as she died, and Faust saved us all by. You don't have to say any more. I understand what he did. Thank you. Now, as for Nozomi, we can't find her, but then that isn't completely unexpected according to Ryrika. It isn't. The answer quickly came to Jalal. She was taken away by the anima. That's what Ryrika believes. I see. So that was what she meant with her promise. Seeing Kyukaku's confusion, Jalal quickly explained. I promised her something in return for her help with getting anima up and running. Her assistance in exchange for safe passing for Nozomi. I honestly believed it had been for leaving the city, but it seems it was deeper than that. Jalal shrugged. Well, she's Fairy Tail's problem now. They'll handle her. May even turn her into an ally or something. I wish I could be there to see it. His smile dropped as he came to the question he desperately wanted answered. What about the king? Kyukaku shuffled from side to side. That's the thing that worries me. We can't find him, and yet we are sure he must have died. Surely you felt it at one point. Like the magic around us all had suddenly screamed out. So I didn't just imagine it then. But his body should be there. He should, in all logic, be dead. Is it? Is it possible he ended up going with Kyan? Could he have ended up back in Earthland with him? I saw Kyan go home. I never saw the king. But I got there a bit late. He could have slipped past without me noticing. Jalal sighed. I hope they'll all be alright. Hopefully the king truly is dead. Then all Kyan has to do is bury him. I hope so too. Kyukaku patted Jalal on the back before turning around to leave. Me and Ganju are going out drinking tonight. You're invited if you want. We'll be at the charging orge at about 7. It's one of the few pubs still standing. Jalal gave her a smile. I'll be there. Good. They'd all be proud of you too, you know. In the end, we won, my king. I know. The hard part is to make this world a better place. Protector of the fairies. Neither Ishine nor Ichigo had spoken yet, both simply sitting at opposite sides of the pillar. Random soldiers would walk past from time to time, giving them strange looks, but they never stayed for very long. Ishine wanted to say something. Anything really. The problem was that he didn't know what to say, and he didn't want to be an idiot for once. It had been years. So long really. And now he was finally able to be this close to his son again. It was like a dream that he never wanted to end. He had just been watching. He had seen Ichigo leaving the meeting room of the council and entering the courtyard, and he had hidden on reflex. He hadn't known what to do, but he hadn't been comfortable enough to do anything, just like every other time he had tried. And then he had seen Ichigo start coughing terribly, looking like he was in so much pain, and something had snapped. He had already taken a step out of the shadows when Ichigo had started recovering, and he simply froze. And then Ichigo had seen him. He wasn't sure if he had been recognized at first, and his hopes fell as he felt Ichigo approaching, as he knew Ichigo would never get close to him knowing who he was. Ichigo hated him in the end. Yuriuki was right. And then Ichigo said those few little words to him, calling him by name for the first time, and all those delusions of hate vanished in an instant. And right now, Ichigo was sitting just an arm's width away, knowing exactly who he was and still staying. There were so many things he wanted to say. 11 years was a long time. He'd start with something simple then. I heard Fairy Tail's setting up a party. How'd you hear that? The response wasn't accusing as he might have expected, instead just mere curiosity. I like to keep track of stuff. You vanished for a while and I got worried. I see. How old are you now? 21. 22? Those extra months are throwing me off. 21. That's the birthday they are celebrating. 21 eh? Ishine chuckled lightly. You're already that old. Man, that makes me feel even older. Ishine tilted his head more towards the pillar. And how is Fairy Tail? Is it a good guild? Do they treat you right? It's fun. I've got a lot of friends. Got a whole crazy group of them. That's good. I'm glad things turned out well for you. Kisuke was a big help too. At those words Ishine felt his blood freeze. The name Kisuk was enough to make him mad because Kisuk should never have taken Ichigo without his permission. And hearing Ichigo talk about Kisuk so easily and the tone of his voice simply hurt. He could hear it in Ichigo's voice. He respected the man immensely. "I said something unnecessary, didn't I?" said Ichigo, and his hind could hear the slight shuffling behind the pillar as Ichigo debated whether to leave or not. "I can leave if you dash." "No, it's fine," lied his hind. "Stay." His words seemed to work as Ichigo seemed to settle down behind him. "What about your health? You didn't look too good back there." "I'm fine," stated Ichigo simply. "Don't worry about it, I'll be fine. I can't help it." "That didn't look good for you. Are you sure you should be out right now in your state?" "It's not a problem, stop worrying about it." "I can't," muttered Ishine, his next words stopping all of Ichigo's protests. "I'm your father after all." How are Karen and Yuzu?" Ishine smiled. "They're doing great. Both are completely adorable, though Karen is a bit like how you are now. She's a straightforward type of girl, and not afraid to beat someone up if they insult her. Yuzu acts as her counterbalance, and she's the sweetest little girl in the world. She reminds me of Masaki in some ways with how kind she is." "That's nice," muttered Ichigo, his voice quiet. "I'm happy they are both okay. You know, they both wonder about you." Ichigo almost shot around the pillar, Ishine spotting the hand gripping round the side of it. "They know me." "Of course," said Ishine, ignoring the almost desperate tone in Ichigo's voice because he knew why it was there. He was the same in wanting to see Ichigo, and he knew Karen and Yuzu would be too. "They know a fair amount about you already. They simply love hearing about the adventures of their Shinigami brother. Karen likes to pretend it isn't much of a big deal hearing the stuff, but she never misses any of them." "I see," replied Ichigo, his voice faint. "So they don't hate me after all?" "Hate you?" Ishine frowned. "They could never hate you, Ichigo. It's alright, you don't have to pretend so hard around me, Dad." And that was when Ishine realized why Ichigo stayed away for as long as he did. He had always believed Ichigo had hated him, and he had been too stubborn to try and resist. But in the end, he and Ichigo were too similar. Ichigo had believed that he had hated him, and had been too scared to try and approach in fear of rejection, just like he had. Ichigo dash. "I need to go," said Ichigo quickly, and Ishine knew he couldn't get any more out of today. 2 small packages slid beside him and he picked them both up, glancing at the rectangle parcels. "What are these?" "Presents. I don't know if Yuzu and Karen will really like them, but if they want them, I'll make sure they'll get them." "Thanks." Ishine couldn't resist anymore, getting to the other side of the pillar and grabbing Ichigo by the arm to stop him leaving. Ichigo had his back to him, and seemed reluctant to turn to face him. "You know where the base for the Rune Knights is? There's a small isolated compound near the edge of it, and you can find a small house there. There'll be a small party on Christmas Eve, and you can be there if you want." "You don't have to decide now," said Ishine. "But if you want, you will always be welcome there." "I'll think about it," said Ichigo, Ishine releasing his grip on Ichigo's arm. "See ya, Dad." Ichigo quickly sped off, using Shunpo in an attempt to get away quickly despite the risks. Ishine smiled softly as Ichigo disappeared, before the smile grew as wide as it could go as he looked at the 2 gifts for the girls in his hand. Ichigo didn't hate him, and perhaps soon his daughters would finally get to meet their big brother. "He doesn't hate me, Masaki," Ishine whispered softly to himself. "He doesn't hate me. Protector of the fairies. Happy birthday." Fireworks went off, and Ichigo could swear he heard a few of the explosions being too close than they should have been, a thought supported by the tearful glare the master gave to the source of the sound. While he had known of the party, he hadn't expected them to go all out like this. It was fairy tale though, and they loved any opportunity to celebrate. They did the same with Listena's return, and now his little party was another opportunity. The size of it all was a lot bigger than his normal ones, kept to just Levi and Laxus in the past for most of the time. "What do you think?" asked Levi, looking at him expectantly. "You like it all?" "It's nice," Ichigo responded. "You lot didn't have to go so far for me here." Levi glanced at the chaos that already started in front of them. I know, but we missed your last one. And you spent a year and a half in Edelas all alone. Even if you made friends, that time must have been lonely. It let me think some things through. Thank you for your advice with Karen and Yuzo. Levi smiled. They like their presents. No idea yet, but they'll get them. I spoke to my dad. I'm not sure what I'm meant to feel. I suppose he may have pushed a bit of his hatred of me to the side for the sake of the girls. Still, for the brief moment we talked, it was nice. And you are sure he hates you? If he did, then I don't believe he would have even spoken to you. I don't know what to believe. Levi shrugged. Better than nothing. Oh, happy birthday. Levi reached out behind her and pulled out a small present. It's been a while since we last celebrated birthdays, so I had to rely on memories mostly. I'll expect the same treatment when my birthday comes around. Ichigo smiled as he took the present. Sure thing. I'll open it later if you don't mind. A bit too crazy at the moment. Sure. I'm just going to check on Wendy and the others. Maybe I can pull Kana away from her new friend too. She's been talking to her non-stop. You go ahead. I've got a few things to think about. Ichigo glanced towards Wendy as Levi headed towards her. He hadn't said anything to her yet about what Jura said, and he wasn't sure if he should. He didn't want to worry her about the threat of death, especially considering how young she was. Perhaps he'd just inform Levi and some of the others. People who could keep an eye on her anyway and to make sure she'd be safe. The party seemed to be fun for everyone. Taoshiro was pretty happy, and Shinji was even interacting with people, admittedly only Grey, but it was a start. He could see Guildarts and the Master having a drinking contest, the people around them taking bets on who would win with the help of Myra and Lysina. Elfman simply stood near them and tried to keep order, only to fail and get dragged into a fight. Mistoggen stood silently at the side right now, but he did jump around groups and was slowly getting better at interacting with everyone. Urza's hatred of him wasn't anywhere near as bad as it had been, so that was a good thing, even if she did still ignore him whenever he was nearby. It was better than outright scowling at least. Right now though, Mistoggen seemed to be having a nice chat with Mest. Mest? He didn't recognize the name. Was Mest someone who had joined in the 3 years he had been away? It was hard to tell, but he must have been introduced to him at some point. The memory was hazy though and not worth trying to analyze. He was sure it would come to him at some point. Faces and names were sometimes like that. It was a shame Laxus wasn't here for this. He hadn't heard much from his friend since Laxus had left, dropping completely off the radar like he himself had done. Where Laxus was would be anyone's guess. For now he would have to wait until he finally returned. Thinking of Laxus drew his attention to Bixlow and Evergreen, chatting to one side while Bixlow made a few wild actions with his dolls. And near to one side was a very strange crowd, surrounding Fried and Kana along with an unwilling participant from the look on the girl's face. Funny, she looked a lot like Nozomi. Time came to almost a crawl as Ichigo's eyes snapped back towards her. That was no look-alike. That was Nozomi. But what was she doing here? Better yet, why were Kana and Fried dragging her into such a large conversation? They definitely didn't know she was previously an enemy, and only the crowd surrounding her was stopping people like Natsu and Gajeel from instantly recognizing her. That and the cloak, suppressing any power she would be releasing. He glanced around the room quickly. No one had noticed much, it seemed, with the exception of Makarov, the Master looking at Nozomi in confusion and suspicion as he noticed the cloak. That wasn't good. It seemed the Master recognized who it belonged to if his glare was anything to go by. It vanished quickly though after a second, either hidden or just gone because of no proof being present of her relation with Kisuk. He had to move fast. Making his way across the room, Ichigo quickly darted silently between groups, trying not to draw too much attention to himself. He quickly leaned down as a body flew over his head, locking eyes with Mistoggen as he passed and making a small signal with his hands. Mistoggen followed his original gaze and noticed, seeing Nozomi as well now. They had to move quickly before someone wrong noticed her and caused a chain reaction. As he got closer, Kana smirked at him before raising her glass towards him. Well Ichigo. Seems you were keeping this lovely little lady a secret from all of us. Makes me wonder what kind of scandalous things you two must have done and wanted to keep hidden. Hello my prince, said Nozomi, not seeming to notice the flinch Ichigo made as all the other people around them turned to look at Ichigo suspiciously. Kana here found me and dragged me to your party. It's quite late though, said Ichigo quickly, reaching through the crowd and gently pulling Nozomi through it towards him. We should probably get going. I'll walk you home. Won't have to go too far from each other then, said Fried, a wolf whistle sounding from someone nearby. Ichigo didn't have the time to spare to look for the source of it, quickly laughing quietly. Well, she lives close to me. A friend of mine who loves drama and acting, as you may have noticed. His voice quickly lowered as he whispered into Nozomi's ear so the others couldn't hear. Let's go quickly. Before anyone recognizes you. Nozomi nodded, quickly letting herself be dragged along as Ichigo pulled her along to the exit by the hand. They were almost out when they heard Kana shout out towards them again. You two at least going to get married before the baby's born. And with that he felt like all possibility of leaving quietly was over. Right as everyone started turning, however, another large noise sounded, drawing many eyes back towards the second source. Mist Ogden stood there awkwardly, a few smashed glasses next to a broken table beside him. OPPs. Remembering to thank Mist Ogden later, Ichigo quickly tried to get Nozomi to the down before Toshiro suddenly appeared in front of him, his sword drawn and pointed threateningly at Nozomi. Ichigo. Who's she? Ichigo glanced around as he tried to buy time. Who's who? The girl behind you. That's Ichigo's girlfriend, Kana called out before Ichigo could answer. She must love him a lot as she even refers to him as her prince. Her prince. Toshiro glanced over at Ichigo angrily. Why prince? Why not master or lord? Why prince? Now Toshiro, said Ichigo, seeing the blade getting closer. Calm down, will you? Think this through carefully. I recognize her, Ichigo. Why wouldn't I? And I could understand it if she was the Earthland version, but she called you prince. A specifically chosen title that has relevance in only one place. Daedalus. Toshiro's right, said Gajeel, one arm shifted to iron just in case. Natsu had also gotten ready to attack as well, while Wendy was simply standing ready but waiting to listen first. She's one of the king's knights. She's from Daedalus, and likely had involvement with everything that happened with us. Nozomi shook her head. It was Ririka that pressed the button. I simply wrote most of the calculations. You're meant to lie, Ichigo shouted at her. Don't correct them. Nozomi glanced at him in confusion. But isn't it already obvious? Why try and carry on the lie? My mentor once taught me a valuable lesson. When in doubt and caught in a lie, talk as much as you can and confuse them before feeding them a new lie, this one more willing to be accepted just to get rid of some of the confusion. Why did you hide her from us, Ichigo? Asked the master suspiciously. Ichigo simply shrugged. She's not a threat. Daedalus is sealed away and she's stuck here. She doesn't hold any ill will, so I let her stay to help her out. By letting her live in your closet, said Kana helpfully. You aren't helping. You had a girl living in your closet, said Levi suspiciously. No wonder they got the wrong idea. Look, it's just a misunderstanding. She won't cause any dash. Ichigo was broken off as pain ripped across his chest, his hand coming up to clutch by his heart as his entire body seemed to be screaming in pain. He collapsed to his knees, barely hearing the cries of concern as people rushed towards him. All he could do was break into that terrible fit of coughs as his vision seemed to darken, his body too weak to even try and reach for the medicine. He could feel Wendy's magic being applied to him, but he could barely feel it, his eyes slowly closing as he blacked out from the pain. Protector of the Fairies. Check the description for the links to the author.